Hello everybody and welcome to Cyberfest 21, the Northeast's biggest cybersecurity festival. My name is Phil Jackman and I lead on Cyber North, the Northeast Cybersecurity Cluster, part of Dynamo, and it's recognised by the National Cybersecurity Centre and DCMS as representing the region. We're also part of UKC3 and I shall go on to that in a little while. So we're running this as one of 14 events that we've got across the region throughout September, so we've got our hands full. Something for everyone throughout that, so please check out the format and the timetable and see what other events are running. But this is our first ever attempt at a hybrid event. So hello to those who are here and hello to those who are online. We've got a significant number of people who've signed up and weren't quite sure who was going to turn up or who was going to remain online. A couple of thank yous before I get started. I'd like to thank Newcastle University for allowing us to host it here. That's great. I'd also like to thank ISC Squared, who are going to sponsor the event, headline sponsor. I'd like to thank Accenture and ISN, who've continued to support us throughout the year. Refreshments, there are none because of COVID, but there is some water out there if you require it. And I think the cafe shuts at 3, so I think that's done. Okay. So here's the format for today. I'm going to start with a bit of an introduction from ISC Squared and a big thank you to them. And then we'll run through this format throughout the day. Okay, so can I ask, is it Scott to come up now and just give your bit? Oops. Yeah, I'm using this one. So I'll just one slide.
Hello.
No, it's one slide. Well, this is going well.
We don't need the slide. It's fine. It's got my name on basically. So, hello everyone. My name is Scott Wakeling. I am a security and technology risk partner at Atlas International. I am also for my sins, the president of the North East England chapter for ISC Squared. Just going to spend a couple of minutes, as Phil said, just as a general introduction to today's event, which ISC Squared is sponsoring. So as we all know, the last 18 months has seen exceptional change in the way we live and work. And as cybersecurity professionals, we've all been involved in securing incredible change in our organizations, often with little or zero notice. And one area of change where that has been particularly profound is in education. Education of our children, but also education in our workplace and our personal career paths too. So those traditional notions of delivering training, qualifications and CPE have all been disrupted over the last 18 months or so, when staying aware of rapid changes in technology and threats has been essential. So as elements of our society adjusted to new ways of working in the pandemic and the changes that it necessitated, we too have had to stay on top of these variables. The sector has continued, however, to maintain its ability to develop the profession with more emphasis on remote and on-demand learning and COVID-safe exam opportunities. It's ensured the sector has continued to face and meet the challenges during very difficult times. So we've all had to embrace change and we've all had to find creative ways of working securely, safely and productive. It's underlined the need for connections, sharing of insights and communication within our various security forums in the region. And while some events and groups have had to pause, others have moved to online offerings to maintain that opportunity to learn and share. At the North East England ISC Squared chapter, we too have had to rethink of ways to keep our community engaged and informed when our usual physical meets had to stop. So we're pleased to be taking part in today's event, another step to normality, and a welcome chance for the cyber community in the North East to come together, learn and share. And with that, on behalf of ISC Squared and the North East England chapter, I'd like to welcome everybody to this year's series of events. And I'm sure whether in person or online, you will find the events thought-provoking, inspiring and challenging. And finally, quick plug, If you're interested in IC Squared or any of the certifications, then please do get in touch. Got some brochures at the side there. Alternatively, feel free to contact me directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Looks like I was supposed to do my slides, but there you go. Never mind. Let's see where it goes. Okay, so sorry about that. Let me tell you a bit about Cyber North and CyberFest, the organization that I work for. So CyberFest is brought to you by Cyber North, which is Dynamo's cybersecurity cluster for the Northeast region, supported, as I've said, by both Accenture and the Innovation Super Network. So we're eternally grateful for them for their continued support. We're recognized by DCMS, Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and the National Cybersecurity Centre as representing the region. But we're also members of the UK Cyber Cluster Collaboration, a new body, which does what it says on the tin. And I'll come back to that in a minute in the presentation. And also, we're a member of Global EPIC, which is an international collaboration of cyber security clusters, truly global organization. So they're getting off the ground as well. So we're working across the industry, to grow the industry across the region to position it as a great cybersecurity business. We're working to grow jobs, highly skilled, well-paid, and interesting jobs. And we're doing this in 4 ways. The first is that we try to make a lot of noise, raise awareness, and build belief in the Northeast as a great place for cybersecurity. So we do this through events, culminating in CyberFest throughout the year. As I've said, the Northeast's biggest cybersecurity festival, which happens during September, and this is its 4th year running. So we've certainly made some progress with that, and I think made great inroads into recognition from central government, local government, and trying to coalesce the industry around the region. So the second thing we do is to help existing businesses to grow in a collaborative yet competitive framework. So we're working on mechanisms to support this and bring opportunity to the 70 or so cybersecurity businesses that are here in the Northeast. Yeah, we're working to grow those businesses. The third thing we're trying to do is to create new businesses by developing a cybersecurity innovation center, or ORCANE is what we're calling it, somewhere in the region. We're working with Newcastle University, Accenture, and Plexel, who run LORCA in London to try and do this. We've put a full business case to central government, and we're waiting to find out whether funding will be made available. Nobody in central government knows anything about whether any funding is going to become available, so we'll just keep our fingers crossed on that. And finally, the fourth thing that we do is to support young people into careers within the cybersecurity sector. We undertook a large piece of work earlier this year with support of DCMS, and we'll be working on the plan to address skills after CyberFest. I'm going to start that as soon as CyberFest is over. So I said I'd come back to UKC3, or the UK's cluster collaboration. Yeah, one of those. Never mind. This exciting new venture is bringing all of the UK cybersecurity clusters together following a process of recognition. There's about 20 or so that we're aware of, 20 or so cybersecurity clusters across the region, across the country, and just under half of those have been recognized, including Cyber North. So they are addressing, or we're trying to do through UKC3, address 3 significant areas for cybersecurity across the country, and really to position the UK is continuing to present itself as a leader in cybersecurity. So we're working on the ecosystem, we're working on innovation, and we're working on skills, very much matching what it is that we're trying to do within Cyber North. And through this, through DCMS's financial support of UKC3, I managed to secure some funding, and we put a small team together of people who are working over the next 6 months to understand the market better, to understand how we can engage with it better, and give us clearer direction of what it is we're trying to do with Cyber North. And Danielle over here speaking later is one of the people who's helping me with that. So there's a lot going on within Cyber North. If you're involved in the regional cybersecurity scene in any way, please be a part of it. Claire, I think it's Ferrar is up next.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is my first hybrid event, so hopefully it'll work. I'm going to try and share my screen.
We can, thanks, that's great.
Brilliant. I'll kick off and hopefully you'll keep me on track for time as well. So like I said, this is my first hybrid event, so hopefully this works as per planned. But just by way of quick introduction, my name's Freha Arshad. I'm part of Accenture's security practice, and I head up on the health and public sector security team at Accenture. So I'm delighted to be back at Dynamo and presenting again. Thoroughly enjoyed it last year. And I want to focus my brief speech on what's happening out there, what are we seeing, and I can talk about some of my personal experiences, but I will be heavily using some of the work that Accenture CTI, or Cyber Threat Intelligence Analysts, have been looking at and producing. So I think it goes without saying, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has changed how we all live and work, and not only personally, but also for organisations in the commercial sector, and all sectors actually, in fact. It's exposed organisations to exponential growth in potential vulnerabilities and risks, both within their organisations and their third parties. Unsurprisingly, you won't be here surprised to learn that threat actors have not been far behind in taking advantage of the situation that we find ourselves in, and actually enhancing and advancing their capability in a range of areas. And I'll come on to them, such as data theft and fraud. I can personally vouch for saying that security teams have been pushed to extremes throughout the pandemic, and I'll hopefully bring in some of my personal experience throughout the talk as well. But ultimately, hopefully what my talk will show is that as we use new technologies to reinvent our workplace and the way we work and live, these are undoubtedly opening up lots of opportunities for cyber criminals as well. And in particular, I'm going to focus on 5 key themes in the current cyber threat landscape that the Accenture CTI team have identified and analysed. So we've, from an Accenture CTI perspective, we've been looking at a number of ongoing threats in the last 12 months and explore the likely outcomes and impacts of these threats as well. And I'll break down each of these 5 areas that I want to cover off today as to what's happening, what the impact is, and why it matters to us both as individuals and as citizens as well. So moving on, the 5 key areas I do want to touch upon is supply chain attacks that target specifically essential software and services. I want to talk a little bit about cyber fraud and how that has escalated dramatically under COVID, and how it affects us both as individuals and perhaps as employees and citizens as well. Again, one that we just see constantly increasing is the insider threat, and how the COVID-19 pandemic has just made this area flourish, unfortunately, even more. We'll then come on to some extortion attacks and the destructive capabilities, and how this area is really changing, and with a focus on likes of ransomware in this area. And finally, I want to touch briefly on some emerging technologies and how that could potentially reinvent and reshape the threat landscape as we move forward in the next 2, 4, and 6 years. So that's hopefully an overview of what I'll be covering today. And I do intend to stick to my time, so I might have to rapidly go through some areas at times. But to start with, supply chain attacks targeting essential software and services is something that we have seen again and again, and attacks becoming more brazen, but by their very nature. So what's happening out there? What are we seeing? We have seen several wide-scale third-party attacks, and supply chains are a major focus, make no mistake, for threat actors today, and are likely to continue into the future as well. There's a couple of examples that I want to touch upon. So if we look at SolarWinds and Microsoft as prime examples, we can see how threat actors are taking advantage of vulnerabilities, crucially in cross-sector critical infrastructure. And by doing this, they've gained access and caused fear, loss of integrity in systems, and also ultimately harmed the trustworthiness of the information processed on these potentially now corrupt systems. Why is this fundamentally important to me and you? If we look at SolarWinds, for example, we know that by publicly available information, most of the victims compromised the United States federal and local government agencies. Now, yes, it's the US in this instance, but it could have easily have been, and I don't want to comment too much on the UK government, but we are equally as exposed, shall we say. And this shows that threat actors can access almost any vulnerable, connected downstream organisation through its unsecured relationships. And I think that's a very poignant fact to reflect upon, that organisations, whether it be government, banks, critical national infrastructure, really need to look at their supply chains. Where are the fallacies? Where are the loopholes? And what the devastating consequences that we've seen from solar winds can show. I mean, ultimately, this is talking about personally identifiable information, but also information relating to me and you as citizens and the information that we share with the state. And another interesting fact about the solar winds breach is that it spanned multiple levels of the supply chain. So here we're really going down to the third, fourth, fifth tier, and it went as deep as the build environments, the document libraries. So ultimately, malware infected software from developers who were simply using SolarWinds software to host their platforms and their code. And I think that kind of scale and depth of breach is something that we should all be alarmed and concerned about. So again, you know, why does this matter? It matters for a range of reasons. I think what is concerning when you look at these SolarWinds stroke Microsoft, and there are lots of other examples I just want to put out there just now, is that these attacks are specifically going after technical and security service providers, because they ultimately can be gateways or routes in to key organizations that each of us use, whether that be local government, whether that be financial services such as our banks, or whether that be other critical national infrastructure. So the route in that these attacks provide are very, very high value and should be concerning. And I think another thing just to note is when threat actors do, you know, find breaches from supply chains, the range of the attack surface can be quite wide. So, for example, we've seen threat actors misuse authentication tools. I think Duo was one that was recently published in the press not so long ago, and they can access cloud environments. And with the ever-shifting pattern and trajectory towards cloud, essentially we could have threat actors accessing sensitive internal documentation or even intellectual property. But they can also be used as platforms for what is known as business email compromise, phishing, or introducing simply malicious files and folders into the system. But another case study that I just think rounds up this point quite well, and why I did want to highlight it, is the European Union has a single resolution board known as the SRB, and researchers identified that the SRB was very high on the SolarWinds threat actor selective target list. Now, what does this mean? The SRB is essentially a central resolution authority for troubled banks. Now, if they were to be breached, threat actors could ultimately have visibility in how the EU defends this stability, of the entire European financial system. And I think we'll all agree that just that very concept and that very possibility could be destructive in so many ways more than just monetary. So again, supply chain, I think, is something that needs to, supply chain attack, is something that needs to be at the forefront of all our minds as we can continue to look at how we can mature our cyber defences and what areas we should be targeting. The good news is there are things that can be done. So what can we do? Sorry, just skipping there slightly. I often refer to these as the brilliant basics. Tighten up privileges, quite simply, across all levels for developing software. Importantly, controls and managing the risk has to be a combination of technical, procedural controls, and really look at the service level agreements that you have with your software suppliers to help ensure they locate and improve vulnerable software prior to deployment. It might sound obvious, but I can tell you from experience, it's surprising the number of times this issue comes up again and again. Also use tools out there. So the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency from the US has developed a tool called Sparrow, which helps detect malicious activity in Microsoft Azure Active Directory, Office 365, and other Microsoft environments. So do take advantage of the security technical tooling out there that can help you assist in preventing such occurrences. And finally, I'd highly recommend the NIST, which is a National Institute of Standards and Technology driven from the US, and looking at their best practice in cyber supply chain risk management. There's some really good practical and procedural guidance out there that can help you map supply chains, identify critical suppliers, and essentially help you review your cyber security practices. And I think, you know, there is no silver bullet, as I will say, for all the areas that I cover, but I think having that kind of comprehensive package of tools and processes at your disposal and using them in the most productive way is very, very practical and probably the most reasonable things that we can do. And I think also it's just hearing them as well, right? What is practical for one organisation won't be practical for another organisation, but having the full range of options available, and these are just some of the ones being identified, is very prudent. So that's all I'll say on supply chain, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour as to why this is so high up our analysis in terms of the key threats out there today. If there's any questions, happy to take them as I go along, or I can more than happily take them at the end as well. Cyber fraud is the next area I want to touch upon. And this has really escalated due to the new and evolving techniques that we're seeing from threat actors and criminals in this space. So with regards to this, what's happening? Threat actors, as you can imagine, have taken, you know, unbelievable advantage of the COVID-19 situation, and it goes without saying that fraud and business email compromise has absolutely flourished. Essentially, unfortunately, in 2020, we're seeing that continue to 2021 as well. Crucially, new tactics, techniques, and procedures have enabled threat actors to exploit what would seem even low-value credentials from small organisations, but that is a trend that we're seeing more and more of. And interestingly, what we've also identified is that new criminal business email compromise and money laundering cases have showed how actually threat actors globally are now teaming up. We've seen teams from Africa, the Middle East, Europe, Asia, all come together to develop complex attack processes, with each fulfilling a specialised role in devising lures in target languages, whether that be target languages, operating malware, or spamming targets. Threat actors have also taken quite significant advantage, and I've got first-hand experience of this not from a personal perspective, certainly from a client perspective, of exploiting COVID-19 relief efforts and available programs for support. Very early on, I can say that fraudsters began identifying and using dormant corporate bank accounts, for example, to file for government-funded loans. They've also increased the volume and the price for selling legitimate corporate bank account credentials on the dark web, and this is all as a result of what one can do with such accounts in the COVID-19 pandemic. And I can certainly say that although our analysis here is from a global scale, the UK is very much impacted as much as any other nation that has got COVID-19 relief funds out there at the moment. Even as we're seeing the financial institutions and governments improve their anti-fraud systems to help detect anomalies in account login activity, for example, and user behaviour, cyber criminals are also innovating and perfecting their evasion techniques. It really is a two-horse race at the moment. And I guess what is also perhaps becoming more apparent is marketplaces like Genesis, it's an online forum, offer basically fraud as a service. And there you can log in and buy cloud credentials, stolen APIs, access to compromised computer credentials, and also your digital fingerprints such as IP addresses, and techniques how to bypass multi-factor authentication. And I think that in itself just shows the bar being raised by cyber criminals and what we on the other side need to be cognizant of. So we have the robust defences that we need to deploy to basically counter the efforts that are going on by these cyber criminals. And again, what many of you may be able to relate to is the use of payment apps such as PayPal and Venmo. So again, in the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in the general use of such apps such as PayPal. However, underground forums have also increased their chatter in frequently discussing stolen credentials to such applications. And that can be there to launder money, cash out funds, or conduct social engineering. And I think it just goes to show that as we as a society have pivoted to perhaps certainly a more online shopping experience during the height of the COVID pandemic, those on the other side of the fence certainly upped their game as to how to monetize this sort of behaviour from the societal shift that took place. So it's a very it's a very dynamic place at the moment, and one that requires a lot of effort and innovation ultimately from the good guys, if I can call it that as well, to stay one step ahead of these cyber criminals. And again, why does it matter? I think it goes without saying that, you know, cyber actors and threat actors that do get access to accounts monetize what they can, and quite often those funds are not, as you can imagine, for good purposes. But I think it's also worth just bringing in mind that fraudsters can also impersonate a company's employees and interact with the company's upstream and downstream contacts, and therefore getting into the meat of their business, and that, you know, undoubtedly has malicious and devastating consequences. And we need to realise that when we look at the analysis that has been done, yes, your multinationals have been targeted, but your one man down the street has also been targeted, and that can essentially put them out of business. So the effects of this are very real and very catastrophic in some cases. I'll move on. So again, what can we do to what can we do to prevent this? And I think, again, our brilliant basics mentality comes into mind, but I think regardless of the type of organisation, regardless of whatever service delivery you're involved in, user training and awareness is absolutely key, and it's absolutely key to contextualise it in a manner that is relevant to your organisation. We see phishing examples becoming much more spear phishing, much more targeted, much more elaborate. And some of the examples I've seen recently, I can honestly and genuinely say it's hard to differentiate between that and what wouldn't be genuine, for example. We need to focus our efforts on vulnerable groups within your employee range, and that for everyone will differ, but I think it's having the realisation that there are different categories that need perhaps different levels of training. We can do technical measures such as limiting RDP and perhaps exploring other methods apart from SMS when you employ two-factor authentication as well. And ultimately adopting strong email authentication protocols and working with your IT and security teams to see what works best is absolutely crucial there as well. So hopefully that was a run through of that section there. Related to that is insider threat will flourish with remote work. Again, this probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. Let me just go to the next slide. So the pandemic related changes have opened you know, a massive door for organisations to insider threat simply by us not being in the office anywhere near that we were. And I think it's clear, I'm keen to make clear that there's probably two types. There's probably the uninformed employees that are causing insider threats to flourish, and probably the complacent ones as well. And I'll come on to that in a second. But I just want to share one stat with you. Whether malicious or otherwise, insiders have caused disruption and critical data loss at nearly half of the organisations that the company Cyberhaven interviewed in March 2020, and they had a pool of about 500 security professionals were interviewed. So if we look at just over 50% hit rate, that is very, very significant, both in terms of business resiliency and operational, but in terms of the wider impact that could have. And like I said, uninformed employees might be the ones that have just accidentally clicked a phishing link, and the complacent ones might be the ones that are using unsecured collaboration tools now that we are so remotely embedded in terms of our work. Either way, insider schemes flourished in 2020. There is absolutely no doubt about that. We've also seen a very, very significant rise in what is known as impossible login activity, essentially where an individual's credentials are used to log in either simultaneously or at different geographical locations within a very short time, i.e. making it impossible. And I think when we look at this, we can almost see the change in behaviour and the maturity, if I can say that, from cyber criminals. Some of you may have heard of the Tesla employee who was offered, I believe, over $1 million to help with a DDoS and ransomware and data leak attack on Tesla. Now, luckily, he declined, but the reality of the situation is that when we've analysed underground forums, our CTI analysts have said criminal forums are routinely and more than ever before, actually, offering services from insiders from a variety of sectors as well, whether that be the financial services, telecommunications, or other organisations in the CNI sector that are absolutely crucial for our running. And I think that is a very worrying trend. Of course, there will be bad apples everywhere, but it is absolutely an area that we need to get to grips on. And the increase in the underground forums offering such services is something that we've been looking at very closely, and unfortunately it just seems to get more and more prevalent every time an analysis is done. I think it goes without saying, why does it matter? I think I've listed some of the reasons in the slides there, but as you can see, brand damage, lost revenue, loss of IP, intellectual property, and also just having that edge, taking that competitive edge along with IP, which can take years and years and years to build up for any organisation. So again, some very real tangible outputs from a negative perspective if insider threats do hit your organisation. What can you do? And it's an interesting one. Like I said, if there's a bad apple, there's a bad apple. Luckily, they seem to be few and not many. The challenge is how do you educate your uninformed users, and how then do you make sure the complacent ones don't get overly complacent and stop the complacency? And I think part of that is cultural. I don't think all security problems are a technical answer. And I do think this is one where the software side has to come into it, and I think nurturing that sense of responsibility via the culture that is created, whether that be via comms or other exercises, is absolutely critical. But there are a number of technical controls that can also be implemented. I think a lot of these relate to the zero trust principles from a security architecture perspective. I've got some of them listed on the screen, but it's essentially, enforcing least privilege for user accounts, so making sure they only have access to what they need to, perhaps creating one-time passwords for sensitive data access, and making sure that your join, remove, or leaver process is kept updated. And especially when we have people exiting the organisation, all access is removed immediately. Personally, I've seen a lot of success with UEBA, user and entity behaviour analytics, which can detect anonymous behaviour. Perhaps even enabling SIEM solutions to detect unauthorised downloading and use of software. There's also other more basics, like limiting the use of USB drives. Still surprise the number of organisations that permit USB drives, even the unencrypted ones. So again, the point of brilliant basics, doing as much as you can. And if you do have the ability, monitoring open and darknet sources to uncover potential high-risk employees and stolen information to actually see if you have been breached to date. And finally, one I can't stress enough is just educating employees, particularly with phishing simulations, is always a very good avenue that can be done by most organisations. So hopefully that covers that. Appreciate going at breakneck speed, but I'm just conscious of time as well. The penultimate area I just want to cover is extortion attacks are advancing and they're having some very destructive capabilities. Let's go next. So what's happening? I think it's interesting. I think when in this area we'll focus predominantly on ransomware. And when we look at ransomware and study the cases that have been out, especially in the last 12 to 18 months in the ransomware area, we've seen that some ransomware actors portray themselves as honourable businesses and promising to decrypt a victim, promising to decrypt a victim's computer, yes, if payment is made. However, as you can imagine, that is not always the case. In fact, it's probably more not the case than it is the case. But we've seen new means of extortion and new means and techniques being deployed by threat actors in terms of how they interact with ransomware victims. And one of the first areas that we've seen is what we call pseudo-ransomware or wiper malware. Cloveware, which is a ransomware recovery company, said in February this year that it saw an unspecified uptick in haphazard data destruction, preventing data retrieval even after payment has been made. And I think that is a very worrying trend. To me, it's not overly surprising, and I think it should, the point about just because you've paid a ransom will mean that you get your data back is just of low maturity, and it's something that I think the message has to spread further. But what is interesting is the haphazardness of data destruction after payments being made increasing is something that we should all be worried about. And actually, I think it can be used as a positive to teach organisations not to pay a ransom, because we all know more often than not the result is not fruitful. We're also seeing a rise in what is called cruel extortion, which is basically name and shame sites have mushroomed, and this just compounds the embarrassment. So if you have been hit and the ransomware actors have perhaps offered a deal where you pay them, they'll keep it on the low key, that has just gone out the window. We've just seen the name and shame sites of organisations and sites that have been targeted absolutely balloon. Empty promises is probably the third one. So again, related to the first one, even after a ransomware payment is paid, threat actors have been known to either fail to delete their copy or, perhaps more worryingly, compromise the data that they have access to. And there's a very pertinent but very worrying example of this. Back last year, I believe, when the European Medicines Agency was breached, a group of threat actors that had access to their data deceptively manipulated the exfiltrated data and then put it back out for anyone to access. And the European Medicines Agency said that this tactic and that data that has now been released could essentially undermine trust in vaccines. And that, in my opinion, would be a real threat to life and public safety. So it's not just a case of, deleting the data or just naming and shaming, which, are horrendous in itself, but the manipulation of leaked data, especially when we talk about vaccines and a COVID-19 pandemic, is very, very worrying. But it is a sad reality of the state that we're unfortunately in. And the final one I want to mention here is global scope creep. So recently, the US and Canadian officials have assessed that some ransomware serves as adversary intelligence services as well as criminals, serves adversary intelligence agency as well as criminals. And the G7 group of nations have warned that some ransomware groups are vulnerable to influence by state actors and may help some states evade sanctions and pay for weapons of mass destruction. So we can see a real geopolitical angle coming in here, and I'll let you in the audience guess who these states may be, but I think it's relatively well known who they're referring to. And I think just with the delicate position again of the geopolitical landscape with these nations, ransomware is certainly playing a very critical but albeit negative role, if I can call it that. Why does it matter? Again, victims cannot assume that simply by paying a ransomware, their data will either be restored or prevented from being leaked further. And unfortunately, the reality is backups and recovery of encrypted data are no longer enough in itself per se. We need to be cognizant that under GDPR, for example, fines, and quite significant fines, could be levied if confidential information becomes public. And the US State Department has warned that entities could also face penalties for paying a ransom, albeit unknowingly, to US sanctioned groups or terrorists. I mean, ideally, avoiding ransomware infections would be the ideal solution, but I think it's safe to conclude that is A, challenging, and B, not realistic. And just to kind of further contextualize this point with two key things, we've seen that the TrickBot and malware, which were malware basically that criminals used to perpetuate compromised accounts, were taken down by governments, and it was seen as a real victory. However, just as quickly as they were taken down, we now seen malware called Bizarre Backdoor and Boor instead spring up and being used just as actively, if not more, by criminals. And therefore, it really is a vicious cycle. And I think the solution will have to be multifaceted. And I think just on this point, finally, we are seeing a decrease in ransomware payments being made, which is good. I think the challenge will be, will ransomware operators take note of that and perhaps come down, or will they just further adapt to new variants of ransomware? I'm just very conscious. Am I on time? Sorry.
No, you're a little over, Freya.
Oh, sorry. I've got one more area that's just about deepfakes, and but I can happily share the slides, and I'm just conscious I don't want to run over.
If you wouldn't mind, that's great. And
Yeah.
look, that's fantastic. And sorry to cut you off, but there's so much information in there. It's fantastic. Could you hang around, Freya, for the
Yeah, more than happy to. Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Excellent from Freya. Last year, I think, or was it the year before, there was a number of significant cybersecurity disruptions, and hopefully Mark Ferrar from Newcastle University is going to talk to us about one of them, and I suppose how we got through it and the lessons that they've learned from that. So can I ask Mark to come up on stage? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is that working now? Good. Somewhere in the background in the ether is my colleague, Jason Bain. He's Chief Information Security Officer for Newcastle University. And what I'm going to just go through is a sort of practical demonstration we had last August, September, of the kind of things you're going to talk about for the rest of the afternoon and the session previously. Does the clicker work? Green to forward. Okay. Jason and I will both answer questions if you've got any questions. So this was a quote from a chap called Henry Hughes, who works for JISC, who provide the Janet network for UK education. Defenders must find and fix every weakness everywhere, all the time. Attackers need only find one weakness. And the sort of, the sentiment of that was really brought home because somewhere in August they found a weakness at Newcastle. And we know since then that the colonial pipeline attack was the result of a single password compromise, a single account compromise that took down that network. So this is a brief timeline. This is a busy slide. I'm sorry about that, but there's a lot of stuff happened. In our sort of forensic investigation of what actually happened back in January of 2020, we saw elevated phishing and network probing on our network. And then it went kind of quiet, and so March came along and we ended up in COVID lockdown, and that was all very horrible. And then in August, we assume that the attacker compromised some credentials around early August. But the concrete evidence was lost. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in another slide. And then the top, reading from the bottom of the top one, so 25th of the 8th, we saw evidence of reconnaissance on our system. So they were looking for various things, probing through the network. On the 26th, the attacker steals more credentials. We find evidence of that. And on the 28th, the ransomware payloads download. Now, there's an interesting sort of timeline thing in here because they actually took a day off. They took 24 hours off from doing anything. And those 24 hours suggest that these people were somewhere in the Far East because they took Saturday off. And then late 29th, the attacker starts encrypting our Windows servers. Now, not all of them. So we come down to the bottom here, 06:30 hours on the 30th of the 8th. Now, that is Sunday, bank holiday Sunday of the August bank holiday last year. One of my team get a text message from a server that's not responding. I think it was probably the university website had disappeared, and a text message came up from a different monitoring system that says the university website's disappeared. And so they got out of bed and had a look. And what they saw was the pay us a ransom or we'll get you sort of threat. So that was, so that alerted my staff. At 9:30, the whole team were up. I was called, Jason was called. By noon, we'd got the police and the National Cybersecurity Centre involved. 2 o'clock, I briefed the Vice Chancellor and various university executives. So the whole team was kind of on this pretty quickly. On the 31st, I briefed Chair of Council because you know, it's important to keep the governance familiar with this, and also the Chair of our Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee. And the Gold Team calls began. I'd kind of go through this in some detail because one of the things that we found after the attack was people telling us we didn't tell them anything. That's both staff and students at the university said, you didn't tell us, you didn't tell us, you didn't tell us. And in actual fact, the 1st of the 9th, that was the first day back after the bank holiday, we issued comms to all staff and all students. And so there was quite a lot of communication through that period in some detail. So what did we find? So then the time kind of expands a wee bit and we start dealing in weeks. And there's some important messages in this. So the first week, you know, we realized we needed some help, and there's a lot of people out there to help. We ended up with by choosing Microsoft's detection and response team. They call it DART. They're really good. And most of our stuff that was hit in this attack was Windows technology. So they have special weapons and tactics, and of course they've got access to Windows source code. So you kind of expect them to be experts. And they helped to secure and understand what the extent of the attack was. And we saw no more attacks after the 30th of the 8th. So no more extent of the attack, no more encrypted servers. The second week, Microsoft started deploying some special tools. We kept securing affected services, and the JISC cyber ops team started to test and monitor our Janet link. And we've got business continuity up and running because that's the middle of that week. We've just started registering all the students to the university. So, you know, 10,000 new students, 20,000 come back, and we're right in the middle of that. And they were doing that with little or no IT. We had email running, you know, so I'll talk about the extent of the attack in a second. But we had some of the critical business systems down, like the registration system. In week 3, Microsoft finished their investigation. They gave us an out brief. That is not a report, so it's not FOIable. It was an out brief. They just left the organization and told us what had happened. We began the process, and we split into sort of 3 parallel overlapping work streams. One was recovery, one was remediation, and one was reinforcement. So recovery was fixing the things that the bad guys broke. Remediation was doing the same things that we did to fix the things to things that the bad guys didn't break. And then reinforcement is adding new stuff so the bad guys can't do it again. So we had those 3 work streams and 3 approaches. Week 4, Cyber Cold team approved the priorities for restoration, because we got 215 servers, took out several hundred pieces of software. So we had to prioritize which ones we needed to bring back first for business criticality. And we started developing long-term recovery plans. So processes like the timetabling system, which was kind of critical to being able to teach students in October, and the door locking control systems, because all our buildings went into lockdown and we had to have security men come and unlock them with keys. So this process carried on. Week 5, critical services restored. Week 6, we got evolution to the emergency structure that we'd put in place immediately. Week 7, we focused on developing new solutions for the remote campus. So we've got a campus in Malaysia that was hit really badly, and most of its file store was taken down. File store here runs on a different technology that we can't afford in. I mean, it's 2 or 3 times the cost because of import duties and things. So we can't afford the same tech in Malaysia as we can afford here at Newcastle. The stuff we have here in Newcastle defends itself against ransomware attacks. Week 7, we focus on developing new solutions for remote campuses, and week 8, we've got this regular pattern of recovery, remediation, and reinforcement. I'll talk a bit more about reinforcement towards the end. So here's some interesting things that we found. We found a lot of stuff, but we found some really interesting things we kind of didn't expect. The earliest evidence of compromise, because you kind of look for patient 0, and actually we couldn't find patient 0, and that worried us for a while. But the evidence of the earliest compromise was probably destroyed unintentionally. But the pattern of evidence around this suggests that a likely scenario was that an ordinary user was compromised in a phishing attack, and then they called somebody from IT because their PC was behaving weirdly, and IT logged into their PC, but their PC has of course got key logging software on it. And the next thing you know, the IT person's account is compromised. And the next thing you know, that they're tracking their machine, they've logged onto their machine and got a credential stealing software. And the next thing is they've got access to a service account. And we think that someone realized their PC was behaving weirdly and rebuilt it. And that destroyed any evidence we've got. So press the button, restart to reset this PC. So it all starts from compromise of a single unprivileged account. Question? We think the IT person rebuilt their own machine. They had the capability of doing that because it was behaving unusually. And of course, they didn't suspect that it might have been happening. So the account was used then to compromise a system account, which gave them escalation of privilege. That had sufficient rights to deploy and trigger encryption malware on 215 out of 2,000. We run 2,000 virtual machines or servers. We managed to get they managed to encrypt 215 of them. So they had lateral movement slowly across our network. The Microsoft team found evidence of several types of malware used, each for a different purpose or aim. Some of it very recently updated, and there were one trick that I'll talk about in a second, but this is, we found evidence of 0 days in our attack as well, which shows you just how innovative some of these people are. The attackers downloaded many tools. All my CIO colleagues across the Russell Group and other universities say, tell us what they downloaded, tell us what they use. There's no point, because they'll download everything that they've got, because it's only few tens of gigabytes. They download that really quickly. We've all got really fast networks, and then they'll pick and choose whatever they need. So they've got the tool bag. They'll just dip into it when they need it. They don't kind of wait around. And they use that on the basis of what they find in our network. So there's no point in me telling people specifics. We talk about patterns. It also means that we need to stay vigilant as well, and not assume that now we fix this one, it won't happen again, because they'll use different stuff next time. And one really simple trick that we think we found was, and there's a number of ways you could do this, is to just reset the AV signature files to earlier than would detect the malware that they were deploying. So our servers, some of our servers just ignored some of the malware they deployed. Some of them defended themselves really well. So we didn't make it too easy for them. We'd had a cyber assessment done by JISC in late 2019, and we already had a kind of program of work in place and a cyber program all geared up and ready to go. And of course, then COVID hit, and we got no money because we didn't know whether students would turn up, how long COVID was going to go on for. All those things in March happened. It just meant it was like, don't press the go button on the cyber program right now, but do what you can. So we did a lot of things ahead of this. We've implemented multi-factor authentication on all our privileged accounts at the root of our domain, and we enabled Azure Active Directory. So we moved the directory into the cloud. We tested and enabled the anti-ransomware protection on our storage and a Dell EMC Isilon storage. The weird thing about that is that there are some teaching software that behaves just like ransomware in the way that it creates files. So it creates hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of files, all with random sort of names and the same file extension. Just looks like what ransomware does as it works through an encryption, and so we have to kind of whitelist that, and it's fairly complicated. We've also implemented a more aggressive program of patching and bringing our services up to date. So these made it more difficult for the attacker, and in our case, we think they had to do this randomly. So somebody sat at a terminal somewhere out east, typing commands at command prompts on our servers. Not a script. If it had been a script, it had been hours. It took them just days to work through this. This is washing dirty linen in public. If you're wondering what the cat sat on, it's our dirty linen. So we hadn't been too smart either. We found gaps and weaknesses more even than the JISC cyber assessment had revealed, and JISC were quite interested in how we found those. We found one system account password had been used on hundreds of servers, many hundreds of servers. So we just kind of, that was easier to do because then we could just script deployment of it. Of course, that makes life easy for admin, but it makes life easy for hackers as well. So that wasn't a smart thing to do. Now, every single service account has a different username and password. So you get compromised one, you've got one thing. Someone published how to configure our remote desktop services on GitHub openly. That was great. Thank you very much. Automatic updates have been disabled on some Windows 10 devices, which went unpatched for many months. We were kind of scratching our heads why, it was disrupting some of the new software we were deploying. Okay. Elevated privileges are being acquired by accretion. That is, oh, can you give me the privilege to do that? Oh, and then months later, can you give me the privilege to do that? And then, oh, can you just give me access to that? And we hadn't kind of really tracked that and realized just how powerful some people are, especially when you've got a remote IT person that, they are the only IT person in the entire organization. So suddenly they're the only one that can do any of that. So, it's very easy to do that. And then patch level reporting had been disabled on a system that was supposed to be PCI, payment card compliant. And it was preventing our scanning software from scanning it. So that was also very helpful. There's a lot of things to think about. Many of them aren't technical. Many of them are actually organizational consequences of a cyber attack. These bad guys will choose out of hours. We're very open about when we're open and when we're not open. I don't run a 24/7 IT group. My IT group runs Monday to Friday 9 till 5, or slightly early, 8 till sort of 6 sometimes at the service desk. And out of those hours, there's somebody that takes a phone call and says, here's your ticket number, we'll call you back tomorrow. So, we need to think about that. Is that appropriate in this day and age when we're running a 24/7 university? They'll choose periods of business critical activity. So last bank holiday weekend, which was our first anniversary, we did a whole bunch of work to shut our services down as much as we could so that we weren't worrying about this over that bank holiday weekend, not just leave them up and running. So we closed down, locked things away, took privileges away, closed accounts down, took administration rights away, shut services down. Business continuity plans often say little more than, don't worry, IT's got a backup, which is the pile of floppy disks, so that that we'll just restore it when it's all gone wrong. That's not a business continuity plan. A business continuity plan, we're trying to focus now on answering these 3 questions. What if you lose your business IT system? How are you going to do your business? How are you going to keep your business process running? What if you lose everything but basic IT? So you might have email and your PC. And what if you lose everything? You've got no IT at all. You can't even get into the building. How are you going to run your business then? And the different scenario planning for those eventualities should give you a sufficient tool bag of behaviors that whatever happens, you'll be able to come and deal with it. And it's a salutary lesson for the business. It's their responsibility to have those plans, not ours. We do disaster recovery, they do business continuity, and it's a shared responsibility to get through that. So a few things to be mindful of, and these were some things that kind of caught us out a little bit, or I've talked to other communities about this because they need to understand this, because it's the sort of unspoken truth of a cyber attack. The team will take responsibility for themselves. They were running the systems, the bad guys hit them, it's because they did something wrong. They're partly to blame. They're not. They were doing a brilliant job. These guys have just got special weapons and tactics, but in order to try and recover from that, they'll work themselves into the ground. So you have to really take care of them, make sure they get some rest and reassurance, and they will need some help if you're talking to organizations that are in this situation. The length and cost of recovery is always significant. Ours was sort of low millions. It's going to be hundreds of thousands to low millions. It's great to know after an attack, but it's even better to know that before an attack, because you can adjust your behaviors beforehand. And you can see the cost of doing the thing right versus the cost of getting it wrong in a much more stark way. So I'm pretty clear about sharing that with other exec boards in universities. And it's also sometimes difficult to confirm this initial attack vector. And we kind of obsess about that because you would feel like you need to plug in a hole in the dam thing. You know, you want to plug the hole in the dam and it's not going to happen again. Well, actually it's irrelevant, because there's greater benefit from addressing any and all of the weaknesses. And back to Henry Hughes and his, you've got to plug all the holes all the time, or found, you know, or exposed or found or reasonably assumed, and minimizing the way in, because they'll find a different way in next time. So no point in kind of finding that. Keeping everyone informed is a really interesting process as well. So don't underestimate the effort of that. We did a lot of, you know, everybody phones the service desk and says, what the hell's happening? So we put a lot of effort into making sure we got the communications structured and layered, so that, you know, only certain people talk to certain other people, so we didn't distract the people working on the problem. Protect the technical teams because they're fighting the fix. Reorganize so that customers have a go-to. It might not be their regular person because they might be fighting the fire. So you give them another go-to and you make sure that they go to that person and they've given the right information, and you're really responsive to it. We had single points of contact for key stakeholder groups like the National Cybersecurity Centre, JISC, the police, University Council, etc. And we also had this was something else that caught us out, because, you know, I don't know how many people here work for a university or or an academic, but academics in particular often only have their university email address. That it defines them. It's the only email address you've got. And suddenly this was true of our exec board. Even half of them only had their Newcastle email address, because they'd only ever had a Newcastle email address since they were an undergraduate. So we need them to create Gmail accounts so that I could communicate them if the worst happens and we lost access to email, text messages, and other channels. And assume that everything you send out to keep your users, customers, whatever you want to call them, informed, will find its way very quickly to the media. We put we put on statement out to user community, and it took 8 minutes before Sky News journalist was calling our press office about something in the email we just sent out. 8 minutes. So some of this goes really, really quickly. So you have to assume that it's going to end up in the public domain. So what are we doing now, a year later? Well, recovery, remediation, reinforcement has led to a larger cyber program, and the University Council has sanctioned that. All the findings of the JISC assessment and everything we've learned in the last year are being fed into that cyber program. And it's doing some interesting stuff. We've implemented the tiering model in Active Directory, deployed multi-factor authentication to everybody. And the really great thing was we just just registered a whole bunch of students again for this year, and they've all just switched on MFA, like no calls to the help desk. And that was kind of unpredicted. We thought it would be a difficult step, but no, it's really easy stuff. We're working on eliminating RDS and specifically RDP for remote access, but you can't eliminate remote access, so you need to figure out a different way of doing it. We're hardening everything, including Windows and Linux. We are building this thing called local account password service. So Microsoft kind of have this. It's kind of a skeleton thing that allows you to hand out, admin usernames and passwords when you need one. We're trying to set it up to be more self-service, so we can even give it to ordinary users so that they can have a local administration password for their device if they want to install. So you check out the password, you install the software you need to do. The password expires in an hour. You lose access. You lose admin access. So, but you've already installed the software, right? Tight control of service accounts and really aggressive patch management. We're trying to get down, and the National Cybersecurity helping us with some focus on doing that, because last bullet on here, we're going to try and take all our managed services through MCSE Cyber Essentials certification, which I think is kind of a first. Many universities claim they have this. What they have is they have a little bit of their infrastructure which is certified. I'm going to try and take all the cluster room desktops, all the staff desktops. We're talking 20,000 devices plus all our servers through this process.
Health issues in the workplace. See if this works. So, firstly, a bit of history. This talks about zero trust. When I first started out in IT, 22 years ago now, everything was in a data center. They were given names like Secret SDC01 or ST10 and had lovely certifications like ListX, and were surrounded by barbed wire, and were either in the middle of nowhere in my experience or right in the middle of Canary Wharf for some unknown for some reasons as well. Technically, as IT security boards, we were kind of kings of our castle. We terminated our MPLS there. We stuck an EAL4 firewall in front of there, or sometimes daftly 2 EAL4 firewalls in front of there, just to be dead secure. We were kings of the castle. Nothing got in that we didn't want to get in theory, and nothing got out that we didn't want to get out. I say in theory again. And then something happened. I'll move to the next slide. Suddenly users were demanding more. They wanted not just access to internet sites, but to applications outside this secure fortress that we developed. They wanted access to Gmail, Office 365, Pastebin, whatever. CFOs read the spiel and were convinced that we could save loads of CapEx costs, moving it to OpEx, and spin up EC2 instances. Happy days. We didn't know where services were running. We just knew services were running somewhere. Cloud applications and the mobile workforce redefined the security perimeter. Employees were bringing their own devices and working remotely. I think this has probably been seen more in the last 18 months than it's been at any time, with everybody trying to work from home. I know of several companies that had VPNs that were terminating with 250 users that on the first day of the pandemic just went down because they had 20,000 users trying to access the end VPN point. So what's the answer? There was a concept called Zero Trust, which was created by John Kerdevag. I hope I pronounced that right. During his tenure as Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research, based on the realization that this traditional security model, on the outdated assumption that everything inside the organization should be trusted. As we can see now, that model is fundamentally broken. Just to give a background on the term, I hate the term Zero Trust. It kind of implies that there is no trust, which to me is kind of the opposite. I really like the term that Google came up with when they implemented their own Zero Trust model. They actually called it Beyond Corp. So the idea was that any Google employee had the ability to work from any entrusted network without the use of a VPN. So I don't know if you've seen what Google does now, but effectively all employees don't have a VPN. They just connect naturally over the internet. So the idea is that you no longer need a VPN. We work from anywhere. I still don't like the term, and actually the term that I was given probably a few years ago was Martini Access, and I don't know if anybody remembers the Martini ads from the 1980s, which was anytime, any place, anywhere. So I like the term Martini Access that just effectively says you don't need a VPN, you work from anywhere you want to, whether that be your garage, the pub, the coffee shop, whatever. You can obviously recognize the similarity between myself and Daniel Craig on that slide. So what does a Zero Trust architecture look like? Oh, I'm going to have to move to the next slide. I've kind of nicked this diagram from Microsoft. It assumes that everything behind the corporate firewall assumes breach and verifies each request as it originates from an open network. Regardless of where the request originates from, Zero Trust basically says, never trust, always verify. Every access is authenticated, authorized, and encrypted before we grant access to any services. You've got micro-segmentation and least privileged access, and they're applied to minimize lateral movement, which, you know, coming back to some of the ransomware things that we saw there earlier, are good things to do. So how did we go about implementing this in DWP? The major thing that we found is that we don't use an MPLS anymore, effectively. The bearer is the internet. We use CASBs as the security enforcing function and a product called Zscaler that some of you may be aware of. It's deployed to all desktops via GPO or Macs via plist. So even if you're on the network, you're not on the network. You've always got an exit point that's an IP address from Zscaler. So we can always tie down to exit IPs. You can access public resources, so you can access Office 365, ServiceNow, AWS, Azure, but we can also access internal services, sort of as a SharePoint site or file systems, without getting a VPN connection in place. So how should we go about implementing Zero Trust? there's kind of a 5-step or what 3, 4, 6-step Kipling model that says effectively who should access the resource, what applications are they accessing, when is the resource being accessed, where's the packet destination, why is the packet trying to resource within the protected surface, and how is the packet accessing the protected surface out of the side of the application. So when we designed our zero trust network, and I can probably give you a good AWS version there, that's the kind of thing that we've looked at. So we've always looked at those six things in the Kipling model of who, what, why, when, how, and given our architecture in that way. Another slide you can probably see as well, we've done it on Azure as well. So moving on finally, it looks like rather than moving from a sort of a castle and moat environment now, we've moved to kind of the never trust, always verify. And the analogy that I've got is kind of like when you were 17 or 18 going down the big market and actually having your name on the door and producing your ID. Once you were inside the pub and wanted your pint, you had to produce the ID again. So we always verify what we're doing. It doesn't matter where you're coming from, as long as your credentials and MFA are there, we will give you access to the services that you need, regardless of where you're physically located. Now, I was going to do a demo, but unfortunately, we don't have the technology in place. So I prayed to the demo gods last night, and everything seems to be fine. So, just to give you a final, I like this slide. So COVID taught everyone it's not going to be all peachy, and you're going to have to be able to adjust quickly in the future. The closer we get to a zero trust model, it shouldn't matter where we are operating out of, a garage, the cloud, or a data center. Now, within DWP, that was turned on its head overnight with COVID, that effectively all our agents were working from home, all our staff were working from home, and we didn't want them connecting via VPN simply because we couldn't scale the checkpoint to that kind of level. I was just going to go to the next slide. Any questions?
But I was just asking you before, but I think you're offline. Is there anything that Mark had missed out?
Well, unfortunately, everybody who's looking at this remotely didn't have any audio, so we didn't pick any of that up.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now, but the audio's just come back.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll sort that out in the recording, no doubt, and cut out all the bad bits. But there you go. So Jason, so did Mark miss anything out in his summary?
I don't know because I didn't hear him.
Oh dear me. So are there any points that you would like to add that Mark may have missed out? How was it for you?
Well, I think I'd re-emphasize, I don't know, I initially tried to make the word business continuity, the business part of business continuity, much bigger than in the presentation, because I think we were quite wanting in actually having real business continuity plans. They all assumed that IT would just go and fix everything, and also that we would fix it very, very quickly within hours. And as you've seen in the sort of timeline, in getting most of our systems and services back from incident to restoration, some of them were sort of 8 weeks in. So having a business continuity plan that just said IT will fix it all and fix it quickly isn't really a business continuity plan. We in IT are in disaster recovery mode. That's what we're doing. What we're not doing is doing business continuity planning on the hoof. And unfortunately, I think we had to do some of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when I was in charge of Durham, which was not Durham in its entirety, but Durham County Council IT department, we put a split in between communication and fixing. And the only person who could speak to the person in charge of fixing was the person in charge of communicating. We wouldn't allow anybody else to speak to. And so no calls went through. Their job was really just to focus on this. So Freya, can I come back to you? So if you can hear me,
yep.
How do you practice this? How do you work out business continuity planning and get people ready for it in a large organization, a global organization like Accenture?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think what I would add to the points that have already been raised is really having in-depth stakeholder mapping, right? I think it's the unintended consequences that catch organizations out. So having that end-to-end plan of how it affects each individual stakeholder in your organisation differently. And I think the other thing that I would only add is just regular testing, and testing that goes beyond tabletop testing. We're quite fortunate that we have instant response teams that can feed us the output, albeit sanitized at times, from live incidents and lessons to be learned from such incidents. So I would say exercises that go beyond tabletops. Exercise is probably the key thing that I've seen work really well, both within our organisation and clients as well.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to ask the same question to Sam, really, because if your services go down, people don't eat. That's serious.
That's very true. Yes.
So how do you cope with this kind of testing and stuff?
So we are currently we run multiple cloud providers, and we split between availability zones. So we've got a AWS in London and AWS in Cardiff. We can fall quite quickly over to Azure. So the same service is running on AWS, running in Azure. We have tested a number of services on failover. We have slight issues with content delivery networks. If content delivery networks go down, that becomes a big problem for us. But our actual services are highly available. But there's always a single point of failure in one of your suppliers.
But do you have systems in place, for example, if you've got no systems, pay what you paid last week?
I'm not going to, no. But we're up, 24/7, and we've got highly available monitoring solutions as well. So if something does go wrong, it's fixed within half an hour, whatever.
Okay, that's fine. So similar question back to Mark then. And so have you found that your organisation is more receptive now to managing the threat better, or managing the business continuity process better, having suffered this?
I think we're having a better conversation. I think the focus and the memory. I mean, it's a year ago now since the particular incident, but I think that the memory of that has not faded, and I think there we go.
The vagaries of hybrid, eh?
Don't worry, I know the way out the building if anybody's stuck. So I think the anniversary was a timely reminder, and I sent out a brief message to most of the management team of the university, so senior officers, heads of unit, just saying this is the anniversary, this is what we're doing, and it's just served as that extra prompter. We go back because it's a work in progress. It's never complete. We've still got some conversations to have, but I think we're in a lot better place. And for our point, in IT, enabling business continuity by having better ways of disaster recovery, A, by being able to get stuff back quicker, and B, by not having the disaster in the first place, or having a less, much smaller impact if we are attacked. Is an easier conversation, but I'd much prefer, and this is the reason I'm sharing, widely across the academic community. I'd much prefer people not to have the experience we had in order to have that sensible conversation. So it's important that we do that.
Excellent. Can I come back to you then, Jason? And I had a really good question, and it's just gone clean out of my mind now. Oh yes. So Fred mentioned about having documentation and understanding the relationship between your systems, but these are all things that you'll get round to when you've got time. How did you manage that? Have you got systems better in place now, or did you manage that before?
I'd probably describe it as work in progress. I don't know if Mark has mentioned that we're going through quite a large restructure of the IT team at Newcastle. And to sort of have a sort of better focus on people doing, say, infrastructure, people doing customer-facing roles and service delivery. And I think we'll have better processes and the like to deal with that as we go through that process. But we're sort of in a sort of hiatus at the moment of sort of half through the reorganization, but not quite. And the university is significantly investing in IT. We're increasing our headcount in IT and increasing our expenditure in IT to be able to do these things better. But it's Rome isn't built in a day.
Okay, and Freya, how do you get these messages across? Because you are a global organization. How do you get, do the messages need to be consistent globally, or do they differ? But how do you get those significant messages across such a large organization?
Yeah, I think in terms of global difference, I wouldn't say there's much. I think, you know, protecting your crown jewels is protecting your crown jewels. But I think the way to make the message land is in what I term business speak and not technical speak. So what is the organization's aim? So if we look at the example just being discussed here by Newcastle University, right? They want to have students in classrooms, at tutorials, doing seminars, and it's all about making that happen, whether it be it in person or virtually. And it's about talk to the C-suite. It's about how do we enable your organizational objectives. It really is. I don't want to dumb it down, but as simple as that.
Excellent, thanks. I'll come back to Mark again, if you don't mind. A question from one of the audience, and well, when I was at Durham, we had a slogan that is, if you think IT, you should try running without us. And I think this outage has certainly demonstrated that the organization can't run without IT. So how do you recommend we structure arguments with business leaders and organizations who don't quite get the relevance of IT to their organization?
Yeah, I thought it's quite useful, the three questions I came to, because what we were doing was we were planning business continuity planning, you know, using scenarios like, well, you know, what if there's a fire in the middle of the town and then there's a riot at the football ground and then all the water's turned off in building B. And it was like, all right, let's plan for that then. And we do the tabletop exercise. And it doesn't kind of work like that. So we did quite a bit of thinking after the event of, you know, how could we start that conversation? We came back to those three questions. What if you lose, what are you going to do if you lose just your business system? What are you going to do if all you've got is basic IT, your laptop and access to email? And what are you going to do if you've got no IT at all and you can't even get in the building? And it just, because it gives people the ability to, you know, not just focus on the last one, which is the complete disaster, riots in the streets and civil unrest, which is what most people think the disaster is, but actually just losing one system that we might not be able to get back from the backups or restore quickly because of various, you know, reasons. You know, there's lots of organizations that are running on pieces of equipment. You know, you all know about them. I'm sure DWP still got some of these in data, you know, ListX data centers somewhere still connected, where people are buying hardware on eBay to keep the thing running. You know, if that breaks, it is gone forever because you just can't fix it. And we have a few things like that. So it is, you know, it's not always that kind of disaster. We have to think about just the specific, and then what if you've got just basic stuff, and then what if you have the real disaster? It just helps people know that they've got a way out in almost any circumstance.
So I'm going to ask you the same question, but while you're thinking of the answer, again, what we did was that we identified those systems that were most critical. And so those that particularly people relied upon, life and death systems, and we said they are the ones that we're going to bring up first, and had a cascading system. But actually the most important systems that we brought up first were communication systems, because if you can't talk to people, you really can't do much.
And I think that's, I mean, turning around and saying, you know, how do you communicate IT being important? Well, over the last 18 months, I can't see any organization that actually hasn't utilized IT to its fullest possibilities. Somebody told me, you know, what accelerated your IT transformation program over the last 18 months? Was it your CIO or was it COVID-19? And actually, because it had to happen under COVID-19, an awful lot of digital transformation took place very quickly, and actually with benefits that probably from a security perspective might not have been as easy to get through governance arrangements, but because we had to do it, it was done.
This was our moment, wasn't it? Suddenly overnight from nothing to everything, and all the things that we've been saying had come true. Okay, that's great. I know we're a bit pushed for time, so I'm going to ask one question finally, and I'm going to start with you, Jason. Has this made you a better organization?
I think so. I think it's allowed us to have those conversations at the top level of the organization. It's, you know, it's opened doors there. But it allowed us to move away from the abstract, because for many organizations this is very abstract. You hear about people who get ransomware incidents. You hear about colleagues who've been involved in cyber incidents. Well, we actually went through one. You know, it's not abstract anymore. And there were failings in what we did to be able to get things back, and hopefully we've learned from that. But it's certainly enabled us to have those more informed and powerful conversations, and at various levels. I said at the sort of top level, but it's allowed us to do that across the organisation. And I think it's opened those doors to have the investment that we were thinking about at the end of the JISC assessment that we had at the back end of 2019. It certainly opened doors to be able to make that into a reality.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to ask a similar question then to Freya. Has your incident response team within Accenture made Accenture a better organisation?
I would say so. I think just being very transparent, it was also in the press a few weeks ago now that Accenture were also hit by ransomware. And I think that goes to show that a company such as ours that spends millions upon millions of pounds on its defences can still be breached. I would just put out there the breach is very, very limited and very contained, and there was no damage or access to any confidential information. But I think the point of a global organisation that has 500,000 employees, has billions in turnover, can still be breached is very poignant. Has it made us better? I'd say yes, of course. We all always learn from case studies and lessons learned, not only when we're working with clients, but in this case, our own situation. And I think I would just finish off by saying, regardless of the type of organisation, the sector you work in, the amount that you've invested in your security defences, I think we have to be honest and say in most cases it's a case of when and not if, and therefore always being on your guard is absolutely crucial, and just doing that rigorous testing constantly, keeping your employees and stakeholders on edge in terms of the new threat landscape evolving is absolutely crucial.
Excellent. I've heard it said that 60% of organisations got attacked, a cybersecurity attack last year, and the 40% just don't know it yet, but there you go. So Sam, similar sort of question to you. Does the work that you do around cybersecurity make DWP a better organisation?
I think it has to make DWP a better organisation, just down to the vulnerable citizens that we serve. If we had a cybersecurity incident, as the one that Mark described, it would be huge. It would affect people's day-to-day lives, not just citizens that couldn't access something, but they wouldn't get money to enable them to buy food or things like that. So we take it in, and I know it's a paraphrase that organizations take security incredibly seriously, but we do take it incredibly seriously because we have to, because the impact on individuals would be massive.
Okay, thanks, Sam. I'm not going to ask you the same question, Mark, because, but I'm going to ask you the final question for you. I really appreciate your candidness of opening up to us and sort of warts and all. Tell us what happened and what you've learned from it. We need more of this. How do we encourage more organisations to be open and honest about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the reasons I've done this, I've done this for this event, and I've spoken to exec boards at two Russell Group, three Russell Group universities, and the University Chairs of Council organisation as well about this, and I think I'm in a really fortunate position because the Vice Chancellor supported this kind of outreach programme, you might call it, because it doesn't get talked about, and it doesn't get talked about because there's a lot of other people often involved in these, from insurance companies to professional recovery agencies, and they all either deliver some secret sauce or they don't want to increase their risks to them rather than their client organization, and so they try and keep this conversation very quiet, and we hadn't had that obligation, and so I've been able to speak about this, and universally I've managed to get praise and thank you, and it's changed the approach and views of other executive teams to this threat in the higher education community, and that's and I think that's been super useful. So I think it is just using these opportunities to be able to get that message out and talk about it frankly. And this stuff I've not told you today, that we won't tell anybody, because there's things we want to, we want to keep it quiet, but actually there's stuff that for a smaller community to know about, and it's the practitioners to be able to deal with that. But actually some of the bigger messages and talking about protecting the teams and keeping them going and making sure you've got a comms plan and making sure you've got a BCP plan and those things, techies can figure out how to make the technology work again. But those human-centered things are really important to talk about. Thank you.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you very much for the panel. I've also got a couple of questions which are coming about kind of qualifications that are needed and that thing. But what I'll do is I'll answer those online in some way in terms of how to get into cybersecurity. So can I thank Jason, Freya, Mark, Sam? That was really, really, really interesting. So we're going to have a short break now. If we could make it just 5 minutes for a quick, and then we'll get back on the horse, as they say. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you're suitably refreshed. And okay, next up, good friend of mine, Chris Fraser from Aspire.
Good afternoon, everyone. All hear me okay? Excellent. Well, hopefully we should have a few slides here. So as you can see, we're going to talk about the impact of remote working on cybersecurity. So we're going to start off with a few statistics here, which have come from Gartner. We could jump on the next slide, or do you want me to do it here? Yes. So 47% of organizations will give employees the choice of working remotely, and 82% allow employees to work from home at least 1 day per week. And that's a relatively recent survey just coming in the last few months. We did a huge amount of mobilization of remote workers at Aspire during the early stages of the pandemic. Somewhere in the region of about 30,000 people, we transitioned from working from offices and traditional areas into remote working. What was quite interesting was the vast majority of people were not prepared for that at all. So only 25% of our customers said they had a robust plan of how people were going to work from home. That could be challenges to do with not having equipment. However, they adapted really well. So within 2 to 3 weeks of the start of the lockdown and pandemic, we found that 90% of our customers had an experience which they ranked as 7 to 10 on a scale of 0 to 10. So it showed, although the preparation wasn't there, the actual execution of that home working went incredibly well. So with this jump towards remote working, what does that mean? I'll start off by just giving you a bit of an intro to Aspire. So for those of you who don't know, we're a managed service provider, currently based across at Hehir, but this is actually our new HQ, which is down on Gateshead Quayside. Those of you of my type of age will remember this as Baja Beach Club back in the day. It was a scene of many a Monday night when I was a student. And after its brief hurrah as the #1 night spot in the Northeast from 99 to about 2005, 2006, it closed. We have now reimagined it as our HQ. So we'll be moving there later on this month. It's come around really, really quickly. And I'd really encourage you all to come and visit us once we moved in. We've got, as you can see, some fantastic offices overlooking the river, very close to all the bars of Newcastle as well. So very, very convenient. Our connectivity through to managed services, through to help desk, and cybersecurity is a big part of that as well. But enough about Aspire. Let's talk about what we're going to run through today. So we're going to spend the first half talking about the tools of remote working and what that actually means to allow people to work from home more effectively, which some of that technology is great, but it does come with some challenges. So then we're going to come on to what you need to consider from a security perspective. So this is the rough sort of 4-stage process we can go through, and then a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So here's a few more statistics from Gartner. I do love a nice Gartner statistic. Now, some of these I'm not sure how much I agree. So for example, 52% of workers across the UK are expected to be remote in 2022. I'm not sure I'd buy that for a second. Now, what I would say is hybrid working is very much here and is here to stay. And the reality is, from a cybersecurity perspective, if you've got somebody working at home 1 day a week or 5 day a week, it really is the same type of risk you're exposing yourself to. So although I'm not sure I buy that this type of proportion of people will be entirely remote working, the challenge associated with even offering hybrid working across your workplace is exactly the same as if they're working full-time from home. There's a couple of other statistics in here. So there's obviously been a big jump in remote working and home working since the start of the pandemic. And as a result, there's been a big increase in cloud spending. And one of the things we'll come on to is now that we have all started to incur all that spend, what more benefit can you drive from that? One of the things that's worth considering is there is definitely a return to people coming into the office. So it is very much this hybrid thing we're going to do. I think TfL's busiest day since the start of the pandemic was Monday this week. But despite that, their revenue in July was only about half of what it was at the corresponding period in 2019. So, you know, there is this very big push, and what I would describe it as a very permanent push to at least a hybrid way of working. So what are the important things we need to consider? And for me, it comes down to three things. So how can we work remotely more effectively? And this isn't actually necessarily just using these tools for remote working. There are a great set of tools which can be used across the board. Secondly, and probably the main focus of the second half of today, is how can we do that securely? And then thirdly, how do we make sure we reduce our costs, or how do we make sure we're getting as much benefit we can from this additional cost we have incurred? So let's talk a bit about giving your staff the tool set to be able to work remotely. So these are some of the things which I think are relevant from a remote working perspective. Really what we're talking about here is what these collaboration tools can really mean. Now the reality is these tools were all largely there before any type of pandemic existed. So Zoom was there, Teams was there. Now for me, what the main difference is actually probably on this right-hand side, so the external collaboration. So I remember back before the pandemic, if you wanted to do a video conference with somebody, you know, for us in the room who were all techies, it was, you know, pretty much a non-event. Yeah, we can all run Zoom, we can all run Teams. But I tell you what, the vast majority of people wouldn't have it installed. And if you tried to do a cross-company video call, people are just not acclimatized to it at all. Now that has changed completely. I mean, there would not be a single person in this room or anyone watching at home who has not done video conferences with people outside their organization. And that has meant that things like WebEx and things like Teams and things like Zoom, and let's throw Google Teams in there, Google Meet in there as well. Everybody has all of these, everyone knows how to run them. And what that then means is it really opens up a lot more collaboration. I mean, I, for one, I deal with a number of suppliers who are based down the south of England. Back before pandemic, they would come and visit me for a couple of days and we'd try and squeeze all the agenda into that small period of time to try and minimize travel time. What I find now is that gets spread up over a number of different days, which for me works much more effectively. We can jump on a quick half-hour call and it doesn't need to become so much of an event. So these tools which have become a necessity because of the need to work remotely have actually enabled us all to work much more collaborative, particularly with people outside of our organizations. And then we'll jump on here to what that means from an IT perspective as well. So there's some really great benefits here from things like IT tools for remote workers. I'm talking about some of the Microsoft tool set here, but there's a number of different ones as well. So things like Intune and auto deploy really mean that if I'm providing one of my users with a new piece of equipment, it could almost just go straight from distribution to their house and they take it out of the box and log into it. They get all their applications. It's a much more seamless experience. And again, these are tools which were all starting to be adopted, but because we've all been pushed into some of the public cloud tools and the Microsoft 365 or the Google suite, then it just means that we have now got these things included. And this is probably an example of what I'm talking about, of making sure you're getting good value from this at all. And I already mentioned collaboration with people outside of your organization, and then some of the security, and we'll come back to on the second half of today as the real main focus of the second half. So there's a bit of a jazzy picture here. So this is what everyone thinks of when they think about remote working, which is, here we go, there's somebody in a park here. She's got a cappuccino and a phone and she's quite happily working away. But for me, there's a slightly wider opportunity here. And for me, the big opportunities of remote working are things like a reduction in travel time. I mentioned that. So I find working with my suppliers in London, reduction in travel time is much, I've never done a conference call in a park. I don't know about the rest of you. I've done a couple in my in my balcony, but I've never done one in a park. So it's about reduction in travel time, one of the things I think will become increasingly important as we come out of the pandemic is if I've got workers who have potentially got minor illnesses, not COVID and stuff like that, if you've got a cold, the last thing I want you doing is coming into the office. I don't want to spread that amongst my entire team. So it's about taking some of these technology leaps forwards we've had and making a bit more real for post-pandemic. So if you've got any illness at all, if you've got a cold, then just stay at home, just work at home for the day. You know, you don't have to start thinking about the fact, well, I've got loads to keep up with. You can absolutely still be working, but just in a less risky way. And it's about flexibility for your people as well. The last thing people want to do is burn a day's holiday because they've got a delivery of a new, I don't know, dog bed or something at home. So it's really about making it so that you're empowering them to use their holidays for what's important, which is recharging, hopefully one day getting across to foreign countries again, that's starting to come back. But it's really about making sure that you're giving the people the things they want to do around the flexibility. And that is really about retaining some of those key staff as well. And that's allowing that flexibility as a key part of that. The other thing I just wanted to mention was, for me, some of the real-time tools are not necessarily about just remote working. It also is about better collaboration. So, for example, with a load of the Microsoft suites and a load of the Google suites as well, you can all edit documents at the same time. I think this is a great thing. We do this a lot at Aspire when we're working on a bid. We'll have 6 or 7 people all on the same document, and you can actually see in real time where people are jumping about and editing it, and you can be, you know, having a conference call going at the same time. And actually, quite ridiculously, we will sometimes do this. If we're all sitting in the boardroom together, we will use these same tools so we can all be editing the same document at the same time. And some of them are absolutely brilliant. So that pretty much comes to the end of what I'm talking about in terms of how the tools are used. Now I'm going to start talking about what we need to worry about for security. So just as a bit of a preamble, all of the big cloud providers, so the AWSs, the GCPs and the Azures, they are all moving towards a more compliant state. And what this is really about is ensuring that public sector organizations and enterprises are much more confident putting their data in there. So I've called out the some of the EU standards and the HIPAA, but also the GDPR compliance, which naturally goes into the UK replacement of data protection, which is very much along the same lines. But what this means is organizations are no longer saying, I cannot let my data go into that public cloud. We know they've got the right standards, and we know that, you know what, apart from anything else, a lot of the auditing is already done. So it's potentially even easier than going to some of the private cloud providers. So that no longer becomes a blocker. And there's some really cool tools in these things by default, and it's just a question of starting to use it. So I start to talk about using some of the out-of-the-box technologies. I'm going to come on to some of those in a bit more detail, but there's some great audit tools there in terms of e-discovery. So if you start getting freedom of information requests, having your data in these types of locations is going to make your life so much easier. And there are even things like data encryption. So with the latest versions of Microsoft Teams, data encrypted at rest, exactly the same with Zoom, exactly the same with some of the Google tools as well. And it's worth thinking that actually quite early on in the pandemic, that wasn't the case with Zoom. And they realized very early on, actually data encryption is a really big part of this. And you remember that, I think it was something like April 2019, they rushed out an update to bring encryption to some of the streams within Zoom and force that out to all of their users very, very quickly. So I think these providers recognize how important the security element of this is, and they need to be enabling people to use their tools in those types of ways. Okay, I've got one thing which I think is the most important thing people need to do into information security. And it's the simplest one in the world. So two-factor authentication. I'm not saying it is the silver bullet, but there's one thing that every single organization should do. It's two-factor authentication amongst any system which can be accessed remotely. And the important thing here is, I'm not saying it's always bulletproof, but if you consider somebody trying to compromise systems, they go for the low-hanging fruit. They go for the systems which are publicly accessible, which have got a simple username and password. And if you have a two-factor authentication system, 99.9% of the time, they're just not even going to bother trying. There are millions of systems worldwide that don't have two-factor authentication. So by enabling this type of technology, you are just moving yourselves, first of all, technically into a very difficult place to compromise, but also just really you're putting yourself right down the to-do list in terms of somebody who's trying to compromise systems, ways of trying to attack. So there's one thing that I would urge everybody to do. And the great thing is that with a lot of the 365, certainly for administrators, it's free out the box. If you go towards the slightly higher P1 subscriptions, and it's included in the M versions of a lot of the 365 products, these tools are all there. And if you don't have it as part of your 365 subscription, it's so cheap to add on with a third-party product. And this is really something which I would strongly urge everyone to consider. Some of the other things that are worth considering as well is just the overall picture of what you need to be considering. So we've got a remote worker over here on the left-hand side. We need to be thinking about their mobile device as well as their endpoint. And then we need to be thinking about where within the cloud we've got various different amounts of data. And we'll come on to a couple of specific parts on this. So with regard to cloud, you need to be thinking about, okay, my data's in G Suite or it's in 365, but do I need to also still be thinking about backing that up, which you absolutely do. So security isn't just about ensuring nobody compromises your data, it's also about making sure you have data integrity as well. So there's some great products out there which will allow you to do very, very cost-effective backups of the entire 365 suite. Just because it's up in the cloud doesn't mean you don't have to consider that. And then we'll come on to a little bit about protecting against phishing and malware attacks as well. So in terms of the phishing and malware, there's a couple of really important things as part of this. There are some great tools as part of advanced threat protection with most of the public cloud suites, and it's really about ensuring you've got the right level of configuration within it. So for example, there are default settings in there for known bad IP addresses. If you see logons from these, block them. And if you see people logging in from outside of normal areas, ensuring that you're restricting those types of access as well. There's one key thing on here as well, which I think everybody should do, which is about effectively testing your user's response to phishing. So the reality is that, again, most of us in this room, if you get an email from somebody pretending to be from Lloyds Bank, oh, you must click here, your access is about to be suspended, quickly, click here, quickly. Most of you won't do that. However, the reality is that we're all in the cybersecurity landscape. For the end users, they are not used to that type of thing. They're used to, they receive an email, they think they have to deal with it. So what we do internally within Aspire, and we encourage a lot of other people to do, is doing that training with their users. So what this actually means is you send a sort of a fabricated email around your user base, and it's not actually obviously going to a dodgy place, but it's going to somewhere that will then report back to you, these particular users clicked on the link. I'm not suggesting you then go out there and shoot them or anything, but it gives you an opportunity to go back and do training with these users and explain how they should be spotting that type of thing. And it can, you know, it can be some of the advanced stuff like actually looking at the URL and does it start with Microsoft dot something, but then it ends up in a really, really strange URL that's got a whole load of numbers that mean nothing. But as soon as you start raising that type of prospect of doing training internally, what it will also do is mean that they are actually thinking about their behavior in front of their email as well, because the last thing they want to do is be found the one who has clicked on a dodgy link and therefore get you know, some sort of like recommendation from the IT department about you shouldn't be doing this. But and that's not about catching people out, it's about making them better IT users. So just the last point I want to come on to is probably about the upgrade path that people need to think on about endpoint protection. So if the number one recommendation I would make is two-factor authentication, the number two recommendation I would make is to migrate towards one of the more advanced endpoint protection products. And we don't really call these antivirus products anymore. And this is about moving to technology like EDR, and most of the products have specific anti-ransomware engines in them as well now. And what EDR will do is it will ensure that all of that data is reported centrally, which gives you two things. First of all, a lot of them have this automatic remediation. So they will say, well, hang on a second, I've just seen this particular computer encrypt 15 files in a row. That's not normal behavior. And it will literally rewind and undo that encryption, which is how some of the ransomware can get stopped. But the other key part of EDR is making sure you are alerting on it correctly. It is going back to a central place. You know, at the more expensive end of the market, you can look down a seam, which will allow you to collect those events internally together with firewall logs and other things. But even at the more cost-effective end, some of these tools will really allow you to make sure you are alerting on things which are properly useful and need responding to in real time, rather than the constant noise which can come from that type of a thing. So this is really the evolution of where antivirus software really has come to these days. So in conclusion, what are the things I think you should be looking for the new remote working? The first thing to do is to enable access to people and to celebrate it. Remote working and hybrid working is something which can be of benefit to pretty much every organization. And the key things are that while this is a challenge for us, it's also an opportunity for people to actually get much more aligned to IT being a useful tool for them. So enable it, celebrate it, and show people how they can use it. But then the other two key parts are make sure you are managing devices and applications correctly. And as I said, two-factor authentication, it can be a bit frustrating, but the benefit you get from it is absolutely massive. And then finally, just make sure you are protecting your corporate resources. So leverage some of the built-in functionality in some of the cloud stuff, the known bad IP address, the advanced threat protection. There's some really cool technology in there, and you will get a huge benefit from that. Excellent. Any questions?
Chris, yes, I've got one. I know you're a rapidly growing business, one of several that's rapidly growing, but fantastic growth over the last few years. Are you seeing that your customers, because they're mostly small SMEs, I would imagine, are they taking cybersecurity seriously now?
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, so obviously you do unfortunately have people who have experiences with this, and it could be people who have, 365 accounts for the MD where he's got the same password he's had since he was 10 years old and isn't interested in two-factor authentication, and they'll often then get the attempts of it. The typical scam in that type of thing is it's an email that goes from the MD after their account's been hacked through to the accounts person saying, please, can you transfer this money in this direction? Sometimes it's successful. I've certainly known examples where people have done that, and unfortunately, it's something which is very difficult to justify. So people who have an experience tend to then take it very, very serious for obvious reasons afterward. I think the larger organizations where you have people who are responsible for compliance and are responsible for risk management, as soon as you have an organization with a risk manager, they take this incredibly seriously. I think the ones who probably have the education journey to go on, which is the journey we try to take them down, is probably that sort of 20 to 100 user business. They tend to be the ones where possibly it isn't taken as seriously as it could be. And I think events like this hopefully educate those types of people and ensure they are starting to take it seriously.
Yeah, it's a constant battle. We did a phishing exercise when I was at Durham County Council. 42% of the IT team fell for it. One of my managers did 3 times and claimed it was not fair. But there you go. My last question for you then is, can we do CyberFest 22 at your new building on the case?
I would be delighted to do that, yeah. So we've got a really great meeting suite up at the top. So absolutely, I'll commit that to you now.
Excellent, that's great. Thanks very much. Okay, thank you very much. Next is Craig. Somebody last time we met was at a coffee shop in the biscuit factory just before COVID. So while Craig's coming up from a company that you've probably not heard of, but it will have all have used. Craig, you can wipe your thing. I have no disrespect to Chris, but there you go. Just while Craig's coming up, I mentioned before there was a couple of questions about skills and qualifications you needed. Scott from ISC is going to answer that and put that out directly. So I'm going to thank you very much for that. But also there's an event on the 23rd, a plug part of CyberFest, which is about skills and business opportunities, and get yourself booked down for that one. Craig, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to be talking about using open source intelligence in cybersecurity, or in other words, how to compromise a company in under 2 hours. A little bit about me first, though. By day, I'm a cybersecurity architect at a company called Greencore. We're a UK manufacturer of food, but by night, I'm actually a bug bounty hunter. So I spend a lot of time hacking other companies that I don't officially work for. One of the main ways I do that is using open source intelligence. So open source intelligence is just finding public information that's in the public domain, whether it's on the internet or paper-based or whatever. It doesn't matter. I put anything that's in the public domain that I can find out there that I can use to my advantage. My favorite tool for that is Google. There are many other ways of doing it, but effectively most of my attacks start with the Google search for what can I find out there. Your in text in the email address formats, password, and then a file extension of Excel documents. You can find all sorts of stuff out there. So straight away, the first hit, here's a list of passwords for one website that's all hosted on Amazon. On the right-hand side, you got a bunch of stuff on someone's personal website where I don't know what they were doing, but there's just a whole bunch of usernames and passwords for various different user accounts on whatever they've got there. Beneath that, I've done something similar on github.com, which is a popular code hosting repository, where I've just done a very similar search for things like secret, RSA, private, and it's found I think the first one there is a private key to access someone's company VPN. The one at the very bottom there is some Amazon AWS secrets to access their credentials. Credentials to access their Amazon Online Services account. Now, depending on what those credentials allow you to do, it could be almost nothing or it could be absolutely everything. When Amazon first came out, those credentials that you got would give you blanket God mode to everything. Now they enforce it to be a lot more locked down. But if you've had an account forever, chances are you might not have changed those credentials in. If you put them anywhere on GitHub, somebody like me is probably going to find them. On the bottom right-hand corner, we've got showdown.io, which is a tool I use quite a lot. That's a great way of finding different things that run the internet. I believe they call themselves the internet cartographers. Effectively, they just map out the internet, and you can do very simple searches for what is running OpenVNC, what is running RDP, what is running TeamViewer, that sort of things. If you look at things like the pipeline hack that was in the States a few months ago, that was probably found using something like Showdown, where an open port for, I think it was TeamViewer that they used, was available out there. So someone found it on there, guessed a password, found a password, and they managed to get themselves on. That was the foothold onto that network. Having said all that, most ransomware attacks don't actually start that way. Most of them start with an email. So it'll generally be an email to an individual. So looking something just like this, probably very similar to something they get every single day. Here's a link to an invoice that's long overdue. We need you to pay this as soon as you can, otherwise your account will be terminated. And on that, there's a link to download a file. The file it gives you is a Windows document, sorry, a Microsoft Office document, could be Excel, could be Word, whatever. The thing that matters is it supports macros. Macros are built-in Visual Basic code that you can use within an Office document to make it do clever things or very malicious things, depending on what you want to do. People are really used to this. Every time you open one from the internet, it'll generally come up with a little message there saying enable content. That might as well say hack me because everyone just clicks it anyway. So as soon as you press that button, it downloads malware from the internet, installs it on that person's machine, and that machine is now compromised. Once that happens, that machine is effectively done. You can from there, you've got full access to the internal network, assuming they're on the corporate network. And if we look at what happened with Mark in the story he brought up earlier on, that is probably something quite similar to what happened there. Now, I've put on Cobalt Strike, which is a tool that was originally created for red teams to simulate what hackers actually do. It's so good, though, that hackers actually abandoned their own tools and started using it themselves. And that allows you to communicate with your command and control servers out on the internet, either through HTTPS, which is encrypted web requests, or through DNS, which goes through any of your internal proxies. So even if you've got something filtered in place, whether it's Zscaler, Forcepoint, or whatever, if you're not doing SSL decryption, that's all going to get missed. If you are, they can fall back to DNS queries. Your local on-premise DNS servers, if there's nothing much watching what's going on with those DNS queries, chances are it's going to hit the server, say, I have no idea what the DNS record is for this thing. I'll go off to the outside world. It will go down top to bottom to the DNS lookup tree, find your malicious Cobalt Strike server at the bottom, and that'll give the reply back, which is the next command for the bot to use on your network. A little while ago, I was asked by a company called Tessian, who are a software developer, if I would do a demonstration on how you can use social engineering with open source intelligence to give a bit more insight and a bit more advanced attacks than what you would get from the general. Here's hello random person, here's a file, go off and do it. That is effective, but if you want to make it really effective, this is the sort of technique that people are using. So the first thing I always do is check out the company's website. So I opened up Tessian.com, had a quick look through. It's quite clear they're a software vendor. Clicking from page to page, they've got some big names on there. They're trying to sell themselves as a big fancy vendor. Probably quite a lot of investment, a lot of money going around, definitely a nice target. The next thing I do is have a look at the VIPs within the company. Who's got influence within this? Who are the people in power? Clicking on the About Tessian page gave me the names of the CEO, the CTO, and the head of client-side engineering. But it wasn't just those three. It was actually everyone of any sort of power at all in the company, including their key investors from third parties. All very good information if you're trying to craft a social engineer attack where you're pretending to be one of these people emailing someone as a person in power. Just give you a sec to take that photo. Next up, I went to the About Us page a bit further down, and I found a map of where their office locations are, their addresses, all the different sites they have, both remote for job hostings and other stuff. Important thing to me, an email address, support@tessian.com, press@tessian.com, both generic mailboxes, but that's the start of what I'm looking for. The next thing I did was go on to what'smydns.net to have a look at their DNS entries. Now, I'm interested in what they're using for hosting things. That starts to give me a bit of a feel for how they're operating. A quick check on the main A records for Tessian.com shows it's all going through Cloudflare. I wouldn't bother with that. They're pretty hard most of the time. There's generally much easier targets to go for than Cloudflare. However, Looking at their email hosting, it's all hosted by Google Workspace. All the records point to Google. That tells me if I go to Google, I'll find something from them running on there. So what I actually did was I went to accounts.google.com, and then if I sign in, typed in admin@tessian.com. When I hit next, it took me to a branded login page for id.tessian.com. This is amazing for me. This is perfect. When I want to create a phishing page to capture credentials, the source code is right here. I can just copy and paste all that into a phishing page, and that's my job done. When I send a link to that, they've got everything. It looks the same. They see this every single day. It's identical to what they're using. Next up, I need email addresses. So I run an open source tool called the Harvester, and you can configure it to use all sorts of things. Out of the box, it just Google searches for things. I found a handful. The first one I found was actually a real person. So I've grayed out their email address. I don't really want to share that in public forums, but it confirmed to me that the format it uses is firstname.surname@tessian.com. The rest is just shared mailboxes or junk like Jane Doe, Jane, whatever. But that confirmed to me the format they use. I can extrapolate that and assume that everyone has the surname at firstname.surname format. So there you go. I'll put mine on as an example. Craig.hayes@tessian.com. Next up, I need a list of all the email addresses of people at the company. LinkedIn is perfect, but I don't really like using LinkedIn, so I just use Google instead. By adding in site, linkedin.com, and then the company name, literally everybody who works there appears, the whole lot. I've got everyone, I've got their names, I've got their roles, I know who they are, I know how long they've worked for, I've got their email address. That's an amazing source of information. I've now got a great set of people to try and target with phishing emails. Next up, I was really interested in getting the signature that the company uses, so I just emailed the marketing department a stupid question and they replied, and now I've got a signature. I just put my own name and phone numbers on there, so that's exactly what it looks like. That's genuine, that's exactly what they use. So when I send a phishing email, I just put that at the very bottom of it. So next up, I'm actually looking for some targets. So using open source intelligence to get a bit more information about the people who work at the company, how they operate, and what that context within which they operate is. The more I know, the more accurate I can make this look, the more realistic it's going to be, the more likely they are to fall for it. So next up, I just did a quick Google, checked out how they got an Instagram account. Yes, they did. Tessian official. Went on. They've got plenty of photographs on there. Not a lot of pictures. Not a lot of followers. Lots of photographs. So I started flicking through to see what they were posting. Lots of pictures of dogs. Turns out they really love dogs out in the office. A lot of bringing a dog to work days. Found out they also love MacBooks. Every single thing was a MacBook. Not a single Microsoft Office, Microsoft Windows, anywhere on the estate, which actually means my traditional attack path of a weaponized macro document isn't going to work because they don't run macros, they don't run Office. They're going to put that onto Google and have a problem running there because it's going to be in the cloud. It's not going to execute on their machine. Undeterred though, I clicked on the careers page link from their Instagram account and found all the job listings. This gave me a list of all the technologies they use within the company. I can see they're using Python 3, they're using Docker, they're migrating soon to Azure from Amazon. It's a full blueprint for everything they do. So I know exactly how the developers think and work and what's normal to them, what isn't. Next, I went on to github.com again, do a bit of searching. I found their account on there. They've got one public repository and it says there's no people in the organization. However, when I click into Catapult, it shows me there's a whole bunch of people. There's 8 of them there contributing to it. 6 of them from outside the organization, but 2 of them actually work for them. The tags were something at Tessian, whatever it was. Again, I've masked them out. That to me confirms that at least those 2 people are working there. When I went into the user account, I can see on the right-hand side here, it's actually showing the recency of how often they were checking in code. So I can see they're actually working there. I mean, I did this a little while ago, but they were checking in code a few days before. So I know this person actively works at Tessian today. So I did the same thing for Jane as well, and she was very similar. So both perfect targets to be fished. So putting that all together and creating a targeted ransomware attack using open source intelligence. The first thing I did was register tessian.com with an M instead of an N to give me a lookalike domain name. Somehow it was available. I thought they would have registered given what they do, but they didn't. So I grabbed that. I registered for Google Workplace to use the same infrastructure that they use. Now I have an attack platform that's exactly the same as what they all use every single day. And the domain name looking almost the same at a glance is going to be really useful to me. I then wrote a targeted phishing email. The first one pretending to be from Ed Bishop. AWS deployment auditing tool. Hi, John. I know you've been working on the AWS Catapult deployment tool recently. I've been trying to run some deployment auditing tools, but I've been able to get them to work. Could you try this with your account and let me know if it works for you? And then there's a link to my AWS credential stealer. And that's from Ed, the guy I got from the very beginning on the first About You page. That's the official signature. That's exactly what it looks like. The next one from John, who I found on GitHub. up to Jane, who he's also working with on the same project. Python script won't work in Docker or standalone. Hi, Jane. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I've been trying to get this script to run all morning with no luck. There are no dependencies to install, and Python 3 is up to date on my MacBook, which is from the Instagram bit earlier on. I've even tried a clean install on a new VM. Could you help me, please? What happens when you run it on your Mac? And there's a link to something on GitHub, which I know they use to a malicious script that installs a Cobalt Strike backdoor onto Jane's MacBook. In terms of total investment, 100 minutes, 1 hour, 40 minutes from start to finish, from everything from not knowing anything about the company to knowing as much as I need to know to create a very effective and very targeted efficient attack on 1 or 2 people within the company. And I spent, well, less than a round of drinks. So £3.59 for a domain name. I found a sale on 123reg, and Google Workplace had a discount code, and I managed to get it for £4.14 for a month. Now imagine if I spent £100,000 on that, what would that look like? That's tenner in a couple of hours. So what can we do about that? I mean, for me, we've all talked about this today. The key thing is to get the foundations in place. Cybersecurity is 80% doing the right things and 20% doing clever things. People get too caught up on doing clever stuff to actually do what really matters. Password policies, multi-factor authentication on everything that you can put it on. My policy is one admin password per, one admin account per machine, one password with admin credentials, and that's used in one place. Never share it across. And if you share a credential from more than one machine to another, that gets compromised, it's access to everything, and that's game over. So for me, just get the foundations in place. We've all talked about this today, what that really looks like. Just make it look the way it should look before you try and do anything fancy. The second thing, assume that you will be compromised. Now, to me, this is key. My focus over the past few years has switched from trying to stop a compromise from happening to assuming that a compromise has already happened or will be happening very soon, and trying to contain it to the one machine that it actually happened upon in the first place. If I can restore one machine from a backup or just completely rebuild it from an image, I'm really happy with that. That's a win to me, because that machine is going to be compromised no matter what. If it then starts to spread to other machines and they elevate privileges by stealing credentials and moving to from PC to service to domain controllers and to cloud platforms, I'm lost. But if I can save it at that first machine they get on and stop it there, I'm happy. So I guess in that case, focus more on containment, detection, and response. Pay attention to what's going on. Capture as many logs as you can from effective places, but make sure people are looking for them. Make sure people are watching what's going on. There's no point in spending a lot of money on SIEM tools and then no one looks at them. If the alerts aren't being picked up, they're a waste of time. And finally, ransomware yourself. Well, not really, but do as much as they would do without actually encrypting anything in the first place. So what I do is I walk through incident reports from third parties. There's a great one there from the dfirreport.com. The Cobalt Strike training materials is amazing. It just shows you everything that the attackers are using. It's all in the products. It's all there. Have a watch what they're doing. Go through those things and figure out how they actually operate. And then run those same tests against yourself. Like, they're doing it. They're going to do it for you at some point if you're not careful. So do it in advance. Figure out where you're vulnerable and then put controls in place to mitigate the places where you have weaknesses. Because if you don't do it now, they're going to do it for you once they get that first foothold. So do that now. Start it straight away. And it could be basic things you might find when they run. I mean, there was the Conti playbooks being released very recently. Someone leaked that, and then someone else has translated that from Russian into English. If you actually go through that, it gives you command by command all the things they do with Cobalt Strike to make it work. From, all right, you've got a bot on someone's endpoint. How do you look at data? How do you look at the AD structure? How do you find out what user accounts are there? How do you find out who's in the admin groups? How many trusted? Everything's in there. Run them all. Just see what commands they're using. Run them. See what your estate looks like. And then try and tighten things up, knowing what the next step is once they get the first dependency before that. And that's it. That's me. A bit of contact details from me on there. You can get me on Twitter. My address is just @CraigHayes. You can get me craighayes.com. And I've also put some additional reading stuff on craighayes.com/cyberfest21 if you want to check out. There's a bunch of links on there to different things. And I'll put a link to either this recording of this or another recording of this at some point as well. Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, of course, there's no need to tell us all this because we could work it out anyway, but there you go. So I've got a little granddaughter, a couple of grandchildren, and I sit and watch the television with her, and the bad guys on her programs are really obvious. You can tell who they are because they're made to look different, but you're angelic. You know, the people out there hacking your systems look like ordinary people, and so you need to be aware of it. That's out there. So what do you do with this information?
What do you mean, again?
Do you actually follow up on it? And
oh, when I'm doing bug bounty stuff, I'll report to them. They pay bounties, so I'll get money for doing that. Sometimes I do it for free, sometimes for charity, sometimes for payment. It's generally through platforms like HackerOne, BugCrowd, Integrity, and then sometimes the people run their own HackerOne. People run their own bug bounty programs as well, but it's mostly through platforms. You just report the vulnerability, help them. The big thing is showing them the impact. This is a vulnerability. This is what I can do with it. So it's more about impact. And for me, it's finding a vulnerability is one thing. It's then writing up the report that this is what I found. This is what I can then do with the information I have. And what can look like quite a benign vulnerability can actually be really, really interesting when you start to flesh out and go, but actually, if I did this and I did that and I did that, that vulnerability looks really small and really insignificant. It's actually a huge problem because it opens up the door to all these other things down here that would never ever happen without that one key thing way back there. So it's, yeah, I report them on and I help people fix them. I mean, in my day job, I do that for a living, and in my nighttime job, I do that for other people. And it's all about making the internet safer, really.
That sounds like a real busman's holiday. And do people people normally take this in good faith, or they?
If you do it through recognized programs, they go out to tender for, they specifically pay for people like me to come and do this. Now they pay a platform to run their company for them, and they pay bounties when I find stuff. If you just go out on the internet and start doing this for fun and no one's looking for responsible disclosure, you're probably gonna have a bad time. I mean, effectively you're breaking the Computer Misuse Act if you haven't got permission to do this in the first place. So be careful, like don't just go out and Google stuff if you want, but like if you find something you shouldn't, you go through and start doing things you shouldn't do with the stuff you find, that's on you. Like I'm taking no responsibility for that.
You'd have to buy a new hat as well. One to a grey, one to a black one, and then that would be it. Okay, that's great, Craig. Thank you very much. And
thank you very much.
Excellent. So actually, I think we need there's a wipe on the thing there, everyone. Could you pass the microphone on to Danielle? Thanks. Last speaker, certainly not least, give a prime slot, as Danielle, who's been working with me for some time now, but as part of the Cyber North team that's going to help us get a better understanding of what's going on in the region. But really great segue between what Craig's talking about how easy it is to get some of this information, and the key thing in your organization is the people. Okay.
So I'm terrified. Who else is terrified after that? I'm desperate to get home and check out my situation online and how I can improve it. Thanks very much for that, Craig. And thanks everyone else for hanging around. I was thinking to saying to Phil earlier on, thanks very much for giving me the graveyard slot. I'm going to be talking to you in the camera. But then I thought, actually it's a festival, so the headline act comes on at the end. So here I am. Thanks very much. So as Phil mentioned, I'm Danielle. I own a company called Inside Out Communications Consulting, and 10 points for those of you who have spotted, I'm not a cyber expert, nor am I a technologist. I'm a communications expert, and so I help people talk to their people about cyber and about other issues that they have to talk about that to do with technology, digital transformation, and major IT change. So why do we need to talk about cyber safety at all? Well, thankfully, you've all done my job for me, so this slide's redundant. But as Freya mentioned to begin with, we've got this issue that's becoming bigger than ever around insider threats. So those people who work for us are causing some problems, to the tune that we know that 9 out of 10 cyber incidents happen because of human error. This is costing UK businesses in the region of £87 billion over the last 5 years. That's ridiculous. This is all because we're not getting it right. Us people are not getting it right. But we also know that we're spending something like 20 to 25% of our IT budgets on cyber. So it's really important that we get the technology right, but we also get the behaviors right. And if people are our weakest link, then let's work with them to help them. So we know this is true. Knowledge is power. Let's give the people some knowledge. So who here has a cyber safety program that you do when you start up with your organization? Yep, one. Okay, that's good. Cyber safety training is great, and it's a really good starting point. But after the first hour of doing any training program, you've forgotten half of what you learned. And that's not just me, that's, everyone. A day later, you've forgotten 75% of what you were taught. So we're investing quite a bit in these cyber safety programs, and we should. We need to repeat those messages more than once, so make sure that people hear them. So let's empower our people. Let's talk to them about what we need them to do and what we need them to do differently. And here we are. We've got 10 in your organizations to get the conversation started around cyber. Right, number one, lead from the front. Sounds simple, okay? So if we want everyone to be smart with cyber, we have to make sure that we as leaders are doing the right thing as well, not just saying the right thing, but doing the right thing. So if we want to make sure that everyone's using secure storage to share and save documents, we can't be turning up with our USBs and saying, oh, I can just chuck that on there because I can't be bothered to figure out how to use the cloud storage. No, we need to be leading from the front and doing the right thing, okay? Number 2, stay on message. This kind of goes back to the first point there. So if you've got a group of leaders and 5 of them out of the 6 are doing the right thing, but one of them has been a bit of a maverick, make sure they're stepping in line. We need to make sure that all of our messaging is consistent across the board, and that is just fundamental. I've got a 3-year-old little boy, Henry. He's adorable. He came up to me last night, Mummy, I want a snack. This is as I was making dinner. I'm like, Henry, dinner's going to be 5 minutes. You can just wait, okay? So he's now learned how to do answer shopping, right? So he runs off to my husband. Daddy, I want a snack. Daddy obviously isn't aware of the fact that it's now 5 o'clock and dinner's about to be served. So he gives him a snack, gives him a banana. That was the end of dinner, right? Leadership's a bit like parenting. If you're not all on the same team, kind of doesn't work. So we all have to stick to the message and all work together. Why, oh why, oh why? Why are we doing this? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. You know, there's this horrific situation happening in Afghanistan right now. The climate crisis is the worst it's ever been. And you want me to think about cyber as well? Why? So people need to understand why there's been a sudden interest in cyber. And this is where we need to be clear with our people. We need to talk to them about what's important. Why does this need to happen? Why does it need to happen now? And why do they need to turn their attention to it? If we just kind of fluff it up and say, oh, you know, there's this new strategic objective that says that we have to look after our cyber, that's not going to fly. If you're honest with them and you can tell them what's happening in the landscape, if there are threats that look like they're going to be, you know, targeting your sector or similar players in your industry, that helps people understand why it's relevant and why it's relevant right now. The HE sector certainly sat up last autumn when the attacks happened with Newcastle and Northumbria, because they knew why they need to do something about it. They realized they were becoming targets too. So make sure that people know the why. Start talking about cyber. So this is something that we need to be doing more of. It's been a bit of a taboo. It's been a bit of a thing that the people in the IT team kind of take care of. You know, we do that once a year, once every 2 years, cyber training program. But between that, we don't really talk very much about cyber until it goes wrong. Well, why? If this is so important, this is something that we need to be thinking about every day, why are we not talking about it every day? So there's loads of things you can do, simple little tactics you can add into your everyday meetings. Things like I have a client who starts every meeting with a cyber share. So in the olden days, that used to be an occupational health and safety share, where they would talk about slips, trips and falls. They're now talking about what's happening online, and they're sharing incidents that they've heard about. They're sharing the latest podcasts that they want other people to listen to. They're sharing information that people need to know about. 2 to 3 minutes at the start of a meeting. Great habit to get into. It starts a conversation and it contextualizes this thing that exists out there in the ether into something that's real and people can actually understand and get behind. So simple tactics like introducing conversations, including articles in your bulletins or your newsletters, using your enterprise social networks. We've all got access to Yammer and Teams and Slack and all of these things these days. Post on there, tell people what's going on in plain English, let them know what's happening in the wider world, promote your services and help them help themselves. Tell stories. So we know that stories are 22 times more effective than facts at helping people remember something. I remember I used to work in a bank, and that's where I kind of started with cyber and with technology services. And one of the things that my team and I used to do every month was we'd go out into the branch and we'd sit in the branch and work from the branch, and the branch staff would go, oh, here she comes again, this woman from head office. And it was the best day of the month because there I got to see what happened actually at the coalface. And one day I was sitting, just doing my work, minding my own business, and a lady walked in, very smartly dressed, nice hair, nice handbag, went to the counter and started talking to one of the tellers. She wanted to transfer some money overseas. You see where this is going? Right, she was lovely lady who had fallen in love with somebody on the internet and had been asked to send him some money to pay for his airfare to Australia. The teller saw, smelled a rat here and thought this is probably something that we need to investigate a bit further. So started a conversation, and the client, the customer and the teller went and had a conversation with the manager in a room. About an hour later, they came out and exchanged words, thank yous and stuff, and went on their way. And it turned out that the teller managed to save that woman about £100,000 and a lot of embarrassment from not making a mistake and transferring money to somebody who wasn't unfortunately in love with her. It was then that I realized that cyber attacks and safety online is so important because it can happen to anyone. She didn't look deranged or silly in any way. She looked like me or you or anyone else that we know. She was just a normal person who had fallen victim of a crime that can happen to anyone. And so we told that story with her permission to the bank, to our employees and to our customers. And that started a conversation with so many other people who had had similar experiences or had thought about doing the same thing, and hopefully prevented a few other of those instances from happening. So share stories and talk to each other about these things. Be clear about responsibilities. I think a few of you have talked about today, we're now asking people to work from home or work in a hybrid way. What does that mean when it comes to cyber? And are people really clear about what that means? Do they know that they shouldn't be leaving their computers open on their kitchen table, in their shared households, or when they go to, is she working in the park, that lady? When she's working in the park, who can see what's on our screen? We need to be mindful of these things, but we also we need to spell it out for people. It's not fair of us as employers to just assume that people know the right thing to do. We have to outline what those responsibilities and obligations are. Celebrate fabulous behavior. So the best thing we can see in an organization is a spike in reporting. If people are reporting what they expect to be phishing or scam emails, then we're doing our jobs well. We want to see huge spikes in reporting. And we want to then celebrate those people so they'll continue to do it. So they'll continue to be vigilant and look at what they're seeing coming through their inbox and making sure that checking it to make sure that it's real or it's not. What we don't want to be doing is slapping their wrists if they, don't do the right thing and we haven't helped them understand what the right thing is. So celebrate it. So if somebody sends you an email to the service desk and it looks like it's, they're reporting a phishing email, acknowledge the email. Thank them for sending the email. Get back to them when you've investigated the email and tell them whether or not it was, and then share that more broadly so that others can learn from that as well. It's so important. Champion the champ. So we work a lot with organizations to put champions networks in to their businesses to help them talk about cyber safety. And the champions are such brilliant people. The people who are, whose job is not cyber safety, who have an active interest in it and who want to promote it across the organization. They're doing this often in their spare time or in addition to their usual duties for which they get paid. So it doesn't hurt every now and again for managers to give them a high five or a slap on the back or a virtual clap or whatever it is you want to do to say thanks. Make sure that these people are cared for and supported because they're going to do a heck of a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And then protect with policies. So again, it goes back to that obligations and making sure that people are really clear about what their obligations are in the organization and what support is available to them. So having information in induction policies, having information in leadership forums, making sure that it's documented in a place where people will expect to find it and can be signposted to it is really important. I'm nearly there, and you're all still awake. And bringing the outside in. So just like Mark talked about before with the Newcastle University issue and incident and how he's now talking to other Russell Group universities and executives, it's so important that people hear what's gone on elsewhere because then it becomes real. It suddenly stops. I think for the HE sector, it's fair to say, it suddenly stopped being a thing that might happen, but it's a thing that actually happened, and it really happened at the wrong time of year for any organisation. And so it's really vital that we can share those stories and do what we can within our sector and within Cyber North in this region to make sure that we're sharing information and we helping each other prevent and be really vigilant and mindful. So, quick plug, we have a program called CyberSafe, which is all of this for you. So if you wanted to outsource all of this stuff, then we can help you with that. We can also talk to you about how you can start the conversation within your organization. There's some information there if you'd like to have a look at our brochure and find out a bit more about what you can do there and just some tips and advice on how you can start that conversation within your organization. And that's me. If you want to give me a little hit up on LinkedIn, that's also cool too. And for the vigilant amongst you, you'll notice I'm wearing the same dress on the pictures I did that day. So I think that was a quick whistle-stop tour of how you can communicate cyber safety effectively. And thank you, Phil.
No, thank you, Danielle. And I have some questions for you. First of all, I don't know if I can reach the QR code. It's only been
it's big enough,
small.
isn't it?
So I think that the telling stories is a fantastic idea. There's nothing more human than a story, in my view. And the stories that we are innate in us, the virgin birth, the poisoned apple, we all know them. We don't know how we found them, but they kind of resonate with us. So I used to start all my meetings, all my management meetings at Durham. The managers had to tell me a good story about something that had happened that week. And some of them just could not do it. They could find many miserable things that happened, but finding something good was a real anathema to them. And it's so a lot of work to do. I'm also, could you tell me a bit more about how we communicate better in the good times so that when it works in the bad times, you've got it going well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all of this is about not the crisis. So it's about making sure that people are aware of what the responsibilities are and celebrating those successes, sharing the information, sharing the stories in the good times so that people are empowered with that information and make sure that they understand what they can do to support themselves in the organization. One thing that we often do is we don't talk to individuals as employees. We talk to them as individuals. So we've all got a bank account, we've all got our own data, we've all got personal information that we want to protect and people that we want to protect. And we talk about in those terms so that once people start thinking like that and they understand how they can protect themselves, by virtue of that, they start protecting the organization and work in that mindful way. And so I think we can use these good times, if you like, to be educating people and changing mindset and behavior in that way so that when things do go wrong, they're prepared.
Yeah, because people outside of life lead very complicated lives. They look after children, they look after parents, they handle their bank accounts, and somehow they become idiots when they come at work for some reason. People think that's what it is. So can you tell me a bit more about how you treat them in terms of that external persona when they're internally within the organization, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so for example, we ran a program last year with a client around Black Friday, and so the client had nothing to do with online shopping, but we educated the workforce on what it meant to shop safely. So we talked to them about things like, the DHL spoof text messages that you get and how you manage to avoid the fake URL websites that are sort of duplicating Amazon or eBay. And people, anecdotally came back to us with feedback that really helped me, because I kind of get caught up in this whole moment of finding the perfect gift or finding the perfect sale, and therefore I could be vulnerable to some of these things. So that was really great, and it's just changing their personal behaviors that then led to opening the conversation to have more of a conversation around what they can do for their organization as well.
Yes, I mean, I think we're all vulnerable to it. I mean, I nearly fell for that the text scam from the post office. I was, you're expecting a parcel today. I was rushed. I was panicking. I was organizing these, and it said you're 159. I was just about to put my password in. I think, what the hell are you doing, Phil? So it can happen to anybody who's thinking about these things. Okay, one thing I'd like to. My final question for you, though, Danielle, is that a fish rots from the head downwards, and in every big organization that I've ever been in, it's the chief executive that never follows the rules. What do we do about that?
It's a great question, isn't it? And I think that's why leadership was the number one point on the slides there. We have to get it right from the top. We have to set the tone from the top. And we all know when we're led by an authentic leader and when we're led by somebody who's just reading the lines that the comms person has written for them. So it's really vital that we, as you know, in my role particularly, I work with these leaders to talk to them about the importance of how they communicate authentically, how they share their own stories, not some stories that they've heard of or had written for them, and are actually living those behaviors. And we create cultures where we feel like it's okay to call that out if it's not happening as well, and making sure that people feel empowered to say, oh, you shouldn't be using that USB drive because we haven't got that as our policy, or you should be using MFA because that is what we're doing here, and feeling like that's the way that they should be working. So it doesn't, you know, I think someone mentioned before, Rome was not built in a day, and nor will you be able to build a cyber safety culture overnight, but it's an iterative process and it starts from the top, without a doubt.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and looking forward to working with you more as the months go by. I've got one question that's just come in. I think we've got time. Yeah, we've actually come ahead of schedule now. And I'm not sure whether Mark or Craig would like to answer this, but it's about the term left of bang. I hear all new sort of slogans and terms and acronyms every day. I think I've learned half a dozen in the presentation today. Anybody know left of bang? Which in effect means we end up concentrate too much on reacting to what might happen and not reacting to what has happened. The left of bang is before it explodes, and the right of bang is after it explodes. Is there a danger of us being too focused on reactive planning? Craig, would you like to?
Sorry, could you say that last bit of the question again, please?
Yeah, could you just come up? Would you mind?
Sure.
And I know that's just going to be fun because your water bottle will go everywhere. Yeah, so in the end of your slides, you said you'd moved away from thinking you might be going to attack to assume you have.
Yeah.
Does that put you in a reactive position too much, or does it tip the balance the wrong way?
Not so much reactive. I guess if you're expecting it to happen, you're already operating in that state where you either have been compromised, you're about to be compromised, so you're ready for it when it comes. You're not really reacting at the time. You're waiting for it to come to you. So, and if you're not, I wouldn't say you're pulling it in, but you're not far off. Like when an attack's on its way, you're like, well, come on, then we're ready. And that's where you really want to be, where you're ready for an attack to happen. Because if you're like, was it left of bang, where you're waiting for it and you're going to react as soon as it happens, you're already on the back foot. You've got to try and get your plans out. Like, are they up to date? Are people familiar with them? Do people have them? Like, if you've lost your file saver, where are these plans that you're then going to enact? Have you printed them off in advance? Like, that's always the common fail. Like, all right, we've got a plan. Where is it? Oh, it's encrypted. All right, what do we do now? What number do we ring? It's on the file saver. All right, okay. Like, so you've got to be ready for it. So you're not really reacting. You're prepared and waiting. Hopefully that'll never happen. But at least you've made everything better and nothing comes of it. You've made it better for nothing, but so what? Like, that's probably a good place to be.
Do you think that the industry has some responsibility here? Because I think we talk about red teams and blue teams,
Yeah.
and red sounds exciting and sexy, and you're going to attack people and stuff them, and blue's dull and boring. You're going to be sitting and trying to protect yourself. Do you think there's something in that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on that one. So like the red team and blue team thing, to me, they both work hand in hand. And I like to work with a red team poking holes in the blue teams. All right, great. Thank you very much. I love that feedback. I'm going to make a change. Do it again. All right, let's stop there. How far did you get this time? All right, you fixed that part. Do it again. So you're constantly battling one versus the other. If you do like an annual red team and that's as far as you go, you have like 11 months later, you're so far out of date. Like, well, what was the point? You've got to be constantly searching for what the problems are and trying to fix those, because the threat attacks, the attack patterns always change. There always come new ways of doing things. And if you're not on the ball and trying to stay up to date, you're going to get caught out. In terms of the way we do it, I've always seen the NIST framework of I like that one. It's a good framework to work, and it's towards the identify, protect, detect, react, respond, recover, something like that. We always get stuck at the very beginning. We do identify and protect, and we all right, firewalls, antivirus, black patch, and blah, blah, blah. We protect. We kind of stop there because that's really easy to do, and you can buy things for it, and you can pay people to do it. But it's like when you detect a problem and you respond to it and recover from it, that's the hard part, because you can only do that once, in effect. But actually, if you're testing for that yourself, if you're always ransomware in yourself, like you're always ready to test for that, whether it's a red team or you just do it internally as part of your own process, or you just run automated scanners. Like there's marketers, I don't know if it really works, but I've seen people trying to sell like automated red team stuff where you can just click go and it'll red team you. Don't know how effective that is so far. It's very early days, but that's the sort of stuff where it's testing those defenses. And if you're able to pick up those things and respond to them, that's where you want to be, because eventually it's going to be real. But if you do it every day, then you're on the right path.
So is that red team as a service?
That's what they're selling.
Yeah, I've heard the expression purple team now, which I think is really good. A combination of red and blue, so that's great. So thank you very much for that, Craig. That was really good. One thing I did, again, we introduced as part of our business continuity when I was at Durham, we had a permanent telephone. Didn't fall into that call, we'd have a conference call running, and then we would decide what did we know about this, who's going to communicate, who's going to fix, and that's sort of how we manage that. I think kind of being ready for the inevitable rather than over planning for, I think it was you, Mark, who said that you tried and worked out what would happen if the water went off in the building, and you just can't think of all the different scenarios. Okay, so we've come to the end of today, the end of number 1 in CyberFest 21. So thank you very much. I'd particularly like to thank Scott, ICS, who've helped us to put on this event. Without the sponsors, it'd be very difficult for us to do this. Accenture, ISN, Innovation Super Network, who've also provided some money for us to help us to get this going. I'd like to thank Freha from Accenture. I think the talk was very insightful, too much to get in, a lot going on. Mark, Jason, I think that was very honest and open and candid, and I think we could do with more of that, because there's always plenty of threats around the corner to that we need to worry about, rather than talking and worrying about the ones that have gone before. Sam, great, thank you very much, and made me think about where we go from there. I thought the roundtable discussion was really good, some really forthright answers, and thank you, Chris from Aspire, who helped us to think about from the other side, I think, from SMEs and how their businesses are growing and being protected. Craig, you scared the bejesus out of me, and I'm never going to look at anybody in the street again and think that they're nice something, and let's see where it goes. So, but I think you're absolutely right. Just shows how, well, if you've got determined, how easy is some of these things, and if you actually had a lot of money behind you, well, yeah, okay. And Danielle, I think that you just brought it all nicely to a close in terms of this is really, cybersecurity is really a people issue rather than a technology issue, and we need to manage that. Okay, thank you very much. We've got 13 more events to go. The next one's tomorrow, which is a cake event with Creative Fuse about the relationship between art and cybersecurity. So that's really interesting, and hope to see some of you there. Thank you very much. Beacon House as well. Without who I could never do this. Thank you very much.